Margaery Tyrell stood by the open window of her modest solar in the Red Keep, the faint salt air drifting in from Blackwater Bay. She closed her eyes, letting the breeze cool her cheeks, wanting a moment of peace before she unleashed the greatest storm of her life. She was quiet, thoughtful, her knuckles white where they clenched around the sill. She thought of her family's words, growing strong, and considered all the ways that strength could manifest. Sometimes it was a swirl of cunning, other times it was silence. But now, at this precipice, her strength was to speak a truth that had been whispered through corridors for many years. She'd known the rumor that Joffrey Baratheon was no true son of King Robert, but rather the product of his mother and uncle's incest. Since coming to King's Landing, it had been a carefully guarded whisper that Margaery had never felt certain enough to believe, let alone repeat. But she had spent time with Joffrey, had watched how the Lannisters reacted around him, how fiercely protective Cersei had become whenever the topic of his parentage so much as brushed the edges of conversation. And Margaery had spent many nights lost in thought, recalling the subtle changes in the lines of Cersei's face, the secret moments between the Queen and her brother Jaime, and the all-too-convenient tragedies that had befallen anyone who probed too deeply into the matter. In time, the rumor did not feel like rumor. It felt like a truth that the entire court conspired to ignore. Still, Margaery had kept her lips sealed. Love and loyalty to House Tyrell demanded it, for the Tyrells had grown so entwined with the Lannisters. Once she was queen, the Tyrell hold on power would be assured, and thus she had abided by the pretense. But now everything had changed. She had thought that she might transform Joffrey, or at least soften him. She saw how the boy king delighted in cruelty, how he reveled in humiliation, turning tourneys and feasts into spectacles of fear. She had tried to redirect him, to guide him toward more noble amusements, to convince him that the best kings were loved, not simply feared. If she could have softened his heart, perhaps she would have remained silent forever, content in a realm that pretended to be stable. That hope had died the night Joffrey struck her. It was in private, and not with an open hand but with the gilded pommel of his dagger. He had been in one of his fits, enraged, it seemed, simply by her presence. Something in him could not bear to be guided, to be challenged, to be told that the small folk viewed him as savage. He wanted to be praised, adored, coddled. Instead, Margaery had tried to speak truth to him gently, and he raised that dagger, pressed it against her cheek in a way that left the faintest bruise. No one in the Red Keep had noticed, no one but her handmaiden, who saw the discoloration the next morning. But word spread, as it always did among the ladies, even if it was only as hushed rumor. Margaery herself felt the bruise constantly. It was a question pressed against her face. How long would she endure this? How long would she endure being a Lannister pawn, or allow her family's future to rest on the whims of a mad boy who wore a crown not rightfully his? She opened her eyes, gazing upon the shimmering waters far below. The wedding was near. Soon she would be Joffrey's queen, in fact. But in the last few days she had resolved upon a new path, one that might well bring war, one that could crush House Tyrell if done improperly, one that would require more cunning than any alliance. The hush of the Red Keep weighed on her, and she turned away from the window, smoothing her skirts in a gesture that offered fleeting comfort. She thought of her grandmother, the Queen of Thorns. Olenna Tyrell had once told her that secrets were daggers, and when used properly they did not need to draw blood for the wielder to cut an enemy's throat. Margaery clung to those words. They echoed in her mind when she made her plans. To reveal the truth about Joffrey's parentage would upend the realm. And yet, if done precisely, it would spare so many future tragedies. It would free the Seven Kingdoms from a monster. It would also place House Tyrell in a precarious position. Everything hinged on timing, alliances, and how the realm's lords would react. She padded across the solar and tapped lightly on the door. A muffled voice answered from within. Ser Talad the Tall, her trusted guard, opened the door. She asked for her brother Loras to be summoned. Then she paced the chamber, wondering how best to begin the conversation with him. Loras was fearless on the battlefield, but even he knew that to challenge House Lannister was to risk destruction. And yet she needed him, her beloved brother who had once been King Renly's confidant. He understood better than anyone the lethal games of power and rumor. When Loras arrived, stepping into the solar with quiet grace, Margaery forced a small smile for him. They had both learned to wear masks in this pit of vipers. She gestured him closer, and he frowned at her drawn face, his deep brown eyes flicking to the faint bruise that still remained on her cheek if one looked carefully enough. "What happened?" he asked, voice low, a slight tremor betraying his anger. Though he had heard the rumor Joffrey had grown violent, seeing the remnants of the mark on Margaery's face made it real. "Has he dared strike you again?" "No," she answered, voice steady. "Just the once." "I'll kill him," Loras said simply. His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it, like a sword sliding free of its scabbard. Margaery placed a light hand on his arm, urging him to quiet. "You must promise me, Loras, that you will not speak of murder so openly, not even in my private chambers. If the walls have ears, they'll have tongues too." He swallowed, but his eyes blazed. "What do you need of me, then? Tell me how we can be rid of him. If we must poison him, we can." "No," Margaery interjected. "Poison is far too risky. We would be the first suspects, and House Tyrell cannot endure such open hostility against the Lannisters. Not now." She considered her words carefully, touching her fingertips together. "It's time the realm knew the truth, Loras." He was silent, though he shifted in place, searching her face. "The truth? About his cruelty?" She shook her head. "About his parentage. Is real, Loras. The rumors are more than rumors. He's no true Baratheon. The king's blood is not in him. He's the product of incest." Loras paled, though he seemed unsurprised. You're certain?" "I'm certain enough that I am prepared to act," Margaery said. "And that is why I must do this with utmost care, lest we find ourselves destroyed. House Lannister holds the throne, the gold of Casterly Rock, and the loyalty, or at least the fear, of many lords. But the realm is already cracking. People despise Joffrey, and many suspect the truth. We must reveal it in a way that leaves no question of its validity. We need proof, or enough of it to sway the lords of the Seven Kingdoms. And we must rally support with all the speed and subtlety we can muster." He waited a moment, glancing around the solar, then lowered his voice to barely above a whisper. "Have you spoken with our grandmother?" "Not yet, but I intend to. She likely already suspects that we have secrets we haven't shared. She might even already know this one. After all, she's more cunning than all of King's Landing combined. But I want your counsel first." Margaery squared her shoulders. "Is House Tyrell ready for the storm that will follow if we do this?" Loras looked torn. Duty to his sister warred with his sense of honor and the knowledge of the Tyrells' precarious situation. "We must be," he finally said. "If you are truly resolved to expose Joffrey, we will find a way to be ready." She exhaled, relieved that he was with her, even if the path ahead was dark. "Then let us speak with grandmother. She has a knack for ensuring events tumble exactly as she wishes them to." That was how the seeds were planted. Margaery and Loras met Olenna in one of the more secluded gardens of the Red Keep, near a patch of pale roses that she fondly claimed were almost worthy of Highgarden standards. Olenna's sharp gaze measured them the moment they arrived, lips pursed in slight disapproval. "What is it now?" she asked briskly. "You've both got that look of conspirators, and I do so hate to be left out of a good conspiracy." Loras deferred to Margaery, who stepped forward, voice low and urgent. "Grandmother, the time has come for the realm to learn the truth about Joffrey's parentage. He is no Baratheon. He's the offspring of Cersei and Jaime Lannister, and we mean to reveal it." Olenna's brow rose, and the corners of her mouth tugged in a faint smirk. "Ah, I see the bruise on your cheek, child. I should have known something like this would be your solution. Joffrey's violence was never going to be tamed by a sweet voice and smiles." She let out a breath, her eyes flicking to Loras. "Have you both considered what this will mean for our alliance with the Lannisters? It will be war." "Yes," Margaery said simply, but perhaps not the kind of war fought with armies. Not if we are careful. If we reveal the truth in a manner that rallies the great houses behind us, the Lannisters will be isolated. And if we can give the realm a more legitimate king, Stannis Baratheon will try to claim the throne. Loras cut in. He's Robert's brother. By all the laws of gods and men, if Joffrey is disinherited, Stannis is rightful king unless we find a way to promote Tommen. Margaery shook her head. Tommen is also Jaime and Cersei's child. The same secret applies. Our only hope is that the realm is so eager to remove the tyrant that it doesn't immediately accept Stannis without question. And it may not be so simple. The lords might prefer stability, especially if we can offer someone else. But we must think carefully. We can't exactly place Renly on the throne. Olenna tapped her cane against the ground. Renly is gone, so the Baratheons are down to Stannis. I don't suppose we can conjure a child of Robert's to seat on the throne, not unless we stoop to the tactics of Varys and his little birds, and start rummaging for a bastard of Robert's that the realm might rally behind. Margaery frowned. Gendry. He's said to be a bastard of the late king, though I only know that from hushed rumors. But that would be a gamble. A bastard's claim is never as strong as a true-born sibling or child. Quite the gamble, Olenna agreed. And Stannis might well burn him or welcome him as an ally, depending on how the man's mood shifts with the tides. She studied the roses, plucked one with care, and inhaled its fragrance. So, we reveal Joffrey's true parentage, and everything changes in a day. The city might riot. Tywin Lannister will be furious, and half the realm will consider us traitors unless we ensure they're too outraged at the Lannisters to care. But Joffrey has proven incompetent and sadistic enough that many lords already doubt him. I see an opening, but it's a narrow one. Loras shifted. There is also Tommen and Myrcella, but both share the same parentage. No matter what, the entire line is tainted. The succession to the throne passes to Stannis. There's no escaping that, unless we find a reason the realm might reject him as well. His zealotry for the Red God is rumored to make lords uneasy. And if we paint him as too rigid, too violent. Stannis is not half as monstrous as Joffrey, Olenna said. But that hardly matters if we can sow enough doubts about him. The question is, do we want to set Stannis on the throne? Or do we want another solution entirely? What if we make a play for the throne ourselves, or else crown someone friendly to House Tyrell? That would mean forging a new alliance quickly, someone the realm might accept. One of Margaery's cousins? Or, dare I say it, Loras, if we married you to some highborn lady with a plausible claim. Margaery frowned. That might be too outlandish. The great houses would hesitate to accept a Tyrell king outright, especially with the memory of Renly so fresh in their minds. The Tyrells are the second wealthiest house in Westeros, but the crown is a different matter. We must be certain we won't spark a war on every front. Olenna sighed, flicking away a petal from the rose. So many pitfalls and so little time, yet I see you've resolved yourself, child. Very well. I have some thoughts. We can gather the evidence we need. I have a few longtime friends among the lesser houses, Crane, Fossaway, Hightower, who might be able to confirm the rumors. Some have had children in the Red Keep as wards or pages. We can compile testimonies that prove Jaime was sneaking to Cersei's bedchamber. In addition, we might glean help from Varys. The spider likely knows every scandal in the castle. Loras winced. Relying on Varys is dangerous. He might sell the secret to the highest bidder. Indeed, he might, Olenna conceded. But if we offer him a future in which the Lannisters' downfall is inevitable, he might choose to side with the winning cause. Varys thrives on stability. He wants a realm that doesn't tear itself apart. Perhaps that is reason enough for him to help us dethrone a monster. And we might not need explicit help from him, just enough quiet cooperation or silence. Silence fell over them, broken only by the faint buzz of bees among the blossoms. Finally, Margaery nodded. We will begin gathering the proof in secret. Once we have it, we'll arrange a confrontation so public that it cannot be disputed. Something that forces Joffrey's hand, or Cersei's, in front of all the highest lords. We must present letters or testimonies that cannot be dismissed as rumor. Then we pray the great houses and the small folk alike break away from the Lannisters. We show them a living tyrant proven illegitimate. Then the realm is ours to shape." Olenna gave a short laugh. "And that last part will be the trickiest of all." They parted ways, and thus began a quiet, frantic gathering of information. Margaery employed her handmaidens, her subtle watchers, to listen at corners and softly approach individuals who might have glimpsed Jaime emerging from Cersei's chambers at odd hours. Loras visited old acquaintances from the Kingsguard, some who had served during the final years of Robert's reign, looking for small slivers of knowledge they might drop. Olenna sent out letters under false names, seeking accounts from anyone who'd once served in the Red Keep's laundry and had seen or overheard suspicious things. Each scrap, each rumor, each detail was woven into a tapestry of proofs. Margaery knew they had to be exacting. Some might lie just to earn coin, and the Lannisters would swiftly call that out. So she insisted on cross-references, verifying claims from multiple angles. It was painstaking work, undertaken in the shadowy back rooms and quiet corridors of King's Landing, in the hush of morning or deep into the night. All the while, Margaery wore her sunny smile by day, parading at Joffrey's side, suffering his temper, planning a wedding whose every detail became more lavish. She chuckled at his jests, indulged his cruelties with careful deflections, never letting him suspect how near he stood to ruin. Amid this tense prelude, a new fear crept over her. She worried that Joffrey would notice the shift in her demeanor or become suspicious of the whispered gatherings among her ladies. Yet the boy king's vanity was so immense that he rarely suspected sabotage under his nose. He believed he was invincible, untouchable, and that belief had been fed by his mother and grandfather. Tywin Lannister, for his part, seldom deigned to notice Margaery's smaller intrigues, so long as the wedding preparations proceeded. As the wedding day drew closer, Margaery's proof accumulated. A handful of former servants, discreetly interviewed, recounted shocking stories of seeing Jaime Lannister slipping into Cersei's chambers in the dead of night, and never through the main corridors. A few had glimpsed intimate moments confirming that his presence there was not simply that of a protective brother. Other accounts told of King Robert's confessions of dissatisfaction and suspicion. One had overheard Robert cursing the golden hair of his children, calling them little lions instead of Baratheons. Then there was physical evidence. Letters, censored, half-burnt, retrieved from a stash that Varys's little birds apparently had hidden away. Though incomplete, they hinted that King Robert had once planned to investigate the parentage of the children with Jon Arryn. All these fragments pieced together formed a tapestry that was difficult to dismiss. Olenna and Margaery agonized over precisely how to use this evidence. They debated if they should wait until after the wedding, or ruin the wedding itself in a dramatic fashion that would maximize shock. Ultimately, they decided the moment would be at the grand wedding feast. The entire court, including lords from every corner of the realm, would be in attendance. Tywin Lannister, Cersei, the High Septon, and all the Tyrells in force. No stage would be grander. The revelation would echo through all the 7 kingdoms in a single evening. And Margaery's reason for that choice was personal as well as strategic. She would not be bound to that monstrous boy. Better to risk it all than to be crowned by him in a ceremony that would mean her subservience forever. At last, the day came. King's Landing was festive, bedecked in the crimson and gold of House Lannister and the rose-clad green of House Tyrell. Street performers juggled and acrobats tumbled. Drums thrummed, trumpets blared, and commoners crowded the cobblestones, eager for a glimpse of the grand wedding. The sept was full of sunlight as Margaery and Joffrey stood before the High Septon. Cersei's pride glimmered, though the set of her lips spoke of her anxiety. She did not like to see another woman overshadow her, even on a wedding day. Tywin looked on, stoic as ever, though those with keen eyes might notice a certain tightness around his mouth. Across the hall, Olenna wore a small, benevolent smile. Loras, clad in Tyrell finery, had a hand near the hilt of his ceremonial sword, a stance more tense than celebratory. When the High Septon concluded the ritual words, Margaery felt Joffrey's hands wrap around hers. She stared into his eyes. Those eyes were cold, devoid of warmth, like bright green glass that merely reflected cruelty. She forced a brilliant smile, playing the part of the newly minted queen for a final moment. The applause rose, thunderous and deafening, as they turned to face the crowd. The feast in the Red Keep's courtyard began at sunset. The royal couple was placed on a dais, with the Lannister lions and Tyrell roses fluttering above them. Endless courses arrived. Roasted swans, honeyed dormice, spiced wine poured into golden goblets. Dancers twisted to the tune of pipes, while mummers in lion costumes prowled to amuse the wedding guests. Margaery's heart hammered, though she remained poised, sipping her wine carefully. She needed her wits about her. This was not a day for drunkenness. Joffrey, of course, drank abundantly. He roared with laughter at the humiliating shows laid on for his entertainment. Dwarfs parading as the Five Kings of the War of the Five Kings, mocking Renly and Robb Stark in a way that drew quiet grimaces from some of the guests. Margaery could sense the unease radiating through the onlookers. She felt each breath tighten in her chest as she counted the minutes until the planned moment arrived. Her grandmother had arranged for a minor mishap to draw attention to the dais. A spilled dish at the foot of Tywin Lannister. That would be their signal. At last, a serving girl, carefully coached and paid well, stumbled near the hand of the king's seat. A torrent of boiled crab in garlic sauce toppled onto Tywin's silk-clad legs. An outraged cry rose up, and the music stuttered to a halt. Joffrey turned, scowling. Cersei stiffened. Olenna stepped forward with a flurry of apologies, which only heightened the attention on that corner of the dais. Margaery silently rose from her seat. When she spoke, her voice sliced through the sudden hush. "My lords and ladies, though our wedding day is meant to be a celebration, I find my heart weighed with a solemn truth that I can no longer keep hidden." All eyes turned to her. Joffrey blinked, confusion flashing across his features. "My queen," he said, his tone thick with wine. "What are you babbling about?" Margaery drew in a breath and prayed she had the courage to see this through. "I beg your pardon, my lord husband, but this cannot wait. The realm is gathered here, and I must speak." She raised her voice so that it carried through the courtyard. "My lords, my ladies, people of the Seven Kingdoms, I come before you to reveal a secret that taints the very crown we have all sworn to uphold. It concerns the lineage of King Joffrey Baratheon." Silence. A collective intake of breath. Joffrey stared in bewilderment, then abrupt fury. "What do you mean?" he snarled, nearly toppling his goblet. "Stop this nonsense at once." But Margaery lifted her hand. "I speak only the truth, a truth I have confirmed with my own eyes, my own ears, and with evidence that I will present to you all. My husband, King Joffrey, is not the trueborn son of the late King Robert Baratheon." A roar of gasps erupted from the lords and ladies. Some cried out in shock, others in excitement, hungry for scandal. The small folk who had gathered along the edges started muttering. Cersei shot to her feet, face contorted in wrath. "You dare speak such filth? Guards, seize her." But Margaery pressed on. "He was fathered by Ser Jaime Lannister, who is no mere knight but the queen's own brother." Chaos. The word incest flicked through the crowd like lightning. Tywin bolted upright, his face stone, yet his eyes roiled with fury. Cersei tried again. "Guards, this woman is lying. This is treason." Her voice was shrill, echoing off the stone walls. Margaery raised a bundle of parchments, her voice cutting through the uproar. "I have in my hand letters penned by King Robert Baratheon and the late hand of the king, Lord Jon Arryn. They express their suspicions regarding the children's parentage. I have also testimonies from those who saw Ser Jaime visit Queen Cersei in the darkness of night, not as brother, but as lover." Joffrey's face was a mask of incomprehension, then twisted rage. He drew his sword, pointing it at Margaery's throat. "I'll kill you for this." Loras leapt forward, steel flashing as he placed himself between Joffrey and his sister. The Kingsguard faltered, uncertain. Half were sworn to protect the king, yet they could not simply strike down the new queen. Screams and shouts erupted in every direction. Lords rose to their feet, uncertain who to side with. The tension snapped in an instant. Margaery could feel the ground shifting beneath her, but she pressed on, voice steady. "Please, my lords, do not let your fear of the crown blind you. Look at Joffrey and his siblings. All have golden hair. Not one bears the black of House Baratheon. We know King Robert's bastards often bore his black hair. He fathered many who are living proof of his seed. Yet not one child of the queen and king has a single Baratheon trait." Tywin's voice, edged with lethal steel, cut across hers. "This farce ends now. Seize that treasonous woman. She is delirious with ambition." But even as he spoke, she saw something in his face, a flicker that betrayed knowledge. He was not truly surprised. He knew. Margaery turned to the lords. "Ask yourselves, do you wish to be led by a false king who torments and kills for sport? Who threatens his own wife with a blade? Who was never lawfully born of Robert Baratheon's bloodline? I say no. I, Margaery Tyrell, do formally denounce this child as an illegitimate pretender to the Iron Throne." A moment of stillness, as though the entire world held its breath. Then the courtyard erupted into pandemonium. Cersei shrieked, hurling a goblet at Margaery that was swatted aside by Loras. Tywin barked orders at the guards, who moved uncertainly, some rushing forward, some hesitating. Olenna's eyes flashed triumph, her mouth curving in a wry smile as she deftly slipped behind a cluster of Tyrell men-at-arms who had come at Margaery's request to provide security for the festivities. In an instant, they closed ranks around Margaery, protecting her from any who might attempt to seize her. Joffrey descended the dais, howling curses, swinging his sword at Loras. Sparks flew as the steel clashed. Loras, though taken by surprise at how swiftly events had turned to violence, skillfully parried. The guests at the table scrambled away, plates clattering, chairs overturned. The small folk spectators began to scream, some fleeing for the gates, others craning to see better. The High Septon sputtered, dropping his chalice in shock. The jesters in their lion masks scattered like leaves. Margaery clutched her parchments, her heart pounding in her ears. She realized she must not stand idle. She cried out, "Lords, ladies, good folk of King's Landing, do not let this become a slaughter. Hear me, and hear the truth." But her voice was nearly drowned in the chaos. She needed the final blow of proof, something that would make the watchers choose her word over Joffrey's. She turned to a man near the dais, a thin, gray-haired fellow in modest clothes, one of Olenna's carefully placed conspirators. He stepped forward, fear showing in his trembling hands. "I served as a page in the Red Keep for 8 years, he cried, voice cracking with desperation. "I saw Ser Jaime in the Queen's bedchambers. I was sworn to secrecy under pain of death, but now I speak freely. The boy is not of Robert's blood." A few more voices rose from the crowd, testifying to the same. Their trembling accounts clashed with Joffrey's screams. The king swung wildly at Loras, forcing him back a step. Another Kingsguard knight, Meryn Trant, rushed forward to help his king, but was thwarted by a pair of Tyrell guards. Steel rang, men cursed. Tywin, still standing near the dais, barked again, "Kill the traitors!" But his voice did not carry the same authority it once might have. The entire hall was splitting along uncertain lines. Some men remained loyal to the Lannisters. Others looked on in horror. Some placed hands on their swords but did not advance. Many simply gaped at the spectacle, unsure where their loyalties lay in this sudden storm. Amid the riot, Margaery spotted Cersei stepping down from the platform, face contorted with raw hatred. She gestured to a Lannister guard, then pointed toward Margaery, clearly intending to have her seized or cut down. She was done with nuance. Margaery tensed and tried to edge closer to Olenna, but the crowd jostled her. She felt her breath catch. If they reached her now, she could be dragged away, forced to recant or worse. But the Tyrell men-at-arms, nearly 24, formed a wall of steel. They had come to guard the wedding from any threat, but they now served as Margaery's shield. Their captain roared, "Stay back!" to the Lannister guards. Blood was spattering the floor, though who had been wounded was unclear. Margaery heard Joffrey's voice shriek again, then a clang of metal. She prayed Loras would not be struck down in this madness. In that moment, another sound rose above the din. The scrape of a horn, deep and commanding, blasted from the entrance of the courtyard. Heads whipped around. The gold-cloaked city watch began flooding in, parting the crowd. For a heartbeat, Margaery thought they were coming to help the Lannisters crush her. But then she glimpsed their newly raised commander, who had sworn fealty not to Joffrey alone but to the crown, and to peace in the city. From his vantage, that likely meant subduing all immediate threats. "Order!" roared the commander of the city watch. "Lay down your arms, or we shall restore order by force." By that point, a few men were already down, wounded or unconscious. One of the dwarfs in costume was cowering under a table. Blood spattered the dais. Cersei was screaming for the city watch to arrest Margaery. Tywin was pale with fury, but saw that the guard was not instantly obeying him. Joffrey, panting, his fine clothes smeared with food and spilled wine, still clutched his sword as Loras circled him warily. A hush of new tension fell, no one quite sure how the watch would act. Margaery seized the moment, lifting her voice again, stronger. "Commander, my men will stand down, but I ask that we be allowed to depart safely. Joffrey is not the lawful king. His claims are built on incest and lies, and we have the evidence to prove it. If you serve the city, then do not let your swords be used to uphold a monstrous false king." She spoke with all the regal bearing she could summon, the new queen openly defying the old guard. "We do not wish to spill more blood tonight." The commander hesitated. The city watch had historically been led by men the Lannisters could buy or manipulate, but the realm was simmering with dissatisfaction. Rumors of Joffrey's cruelty had spread among the rank and file, and the commander himself had been rumored to despise Joffrey's random punishments. Margaery prayed that might tip the scales. Tywin's voice rumbled, "You are the commander of the city watch. If you do not act, you will be guilty of treason. Seize this woman, or face the headsman's block." The man swallowed visibly. Guards behind him fidgeted. Then, at last, the commander set his jaw and said, "I serve the king's peace. I will seize no one tonight until we have sorted out the truth of these claims." He raised his pike. "Lay down arms, all of you." That was enough. Tension still crackled, but the courtyard paused. Some men lowered their swords. Others stubbornly held them. Joffrey spat on the ground. "I am your king," he roared. "You take orders from me. Kill them. Kill them all." But the commander did not budge. The gold cloaks formed a line, pressing in. They outnumbered the Lannister house guards. Tywin realized that any attempt to use force now might lead to the entire city watch turning on them. That would be a bloodbath, one the Lannisters might not win in a single night. And though the old lion was proud, he was not a fool. "Fine," Tywin snarled. "We will withdraw for now, but let no one doubt, there will be justice for this treachery." Cersei, trembling with fury, moved to pull Joffrey away. The boy nearly lunged again, but his mother's arms were like iron around him. Loras, chest heaving, lowered his sword. Margaery's men circled her protectively, and the entire dais gradually cleared as the Lannisters retreated, escorted by a cluster of gold cloaks who were determined to keep the peace. The hush was eerie. The wedding guests parted, many too stunned to speak. In the end, Margaery found herself standing in the ruined feast hall, shattered dishes and spilled wine around her, with her grandmother at her side and her men standing guard. She realized she was shaking. She had done it. She had torn down the illusions that had held the realm's capital together, and now nothing would be the same. A hush of terror and elation flooded her. She turned to Olenna, her voice rasping, "What now?" Olenna patted her granddaughter's hand. "Now we do what we must to survive the aftermath." It would take weeks for the full consequences of the confrontation to unfold. That very night, Margaery and Loras, with the rest of their household, left the Red Keep under the watchful eyes of the city watch. who essentially brokered a temporary truce to prevent further bloodshed. They returned to a secure villa in the city that belonged to a Tyrell retainer. There, they waited, uncertain if Tywin would strike them in the dark of night. But the next dawn, they learned that Cersei and Joffrey had barricaded themselves in the Red Keep, claiming that the city was infested with traitors. They blamed Margaery for unleashing lies. Yet the rumor spread like wildfire, from the mouths of servants and wedding guests who had witnessed the confrontation. Soon all of King's Landing spoke of it openly. Joffrey Baratheon was the product of incest. He was no rightful king. Margaery's men scoured the streets to gauge the temperature of the crowds. She heard disturbing reports. Some peasants were outraged that they had been deceived, cursing the abomination in the castle. Others merely shrugged, saying that all kings were false in their own way. But it was enough to sap the Lannisters' hold on the city. Riots threatened to erupt in Flea Bottom. Tywin responded by placing the city under a kind of martial law, with Lannister men patrolling the gates. But the more force they showed, the more the people seethed. With each passing day, more gold cloaks quietly refused to crack down too harshly on the populace. At the same time, ravens flew from King's Landing to every corner of the realm, carrying letters from Margaery's camp. She and Olenna had prepared them beforehand, detailing the evidence of incest, the accounts of Robert's and Jon Arryn's suspicions, and urging the lords of the Seven Kingdoms to reject Joffrey's claim. They asked for alliances, promising that House Tyrell desired stability and a lawful monarchy. Every day, more letters were sent, some by quiet messengers riding forth to the great houses. They knew some of those letters might be intercepted, but enough would reach their destinations to spread the word. Loras was restless, pacing the villa's courtyard, impatient for news of how the lords would respond. Margaery tried to project calm, though inside she was as anxious as he. The entire realm trembled on the edge of war, its fate balanced on how each great house would react. If half the realm decided to rally to Joffrey's side, the Tyrells would be besieged. But Margaery believed that was unlikely. The North was in chaos, but the young Stark girl, Sansa, had fled or been wed. Reports were conflicted. The Vale was quiet, though rumor said they had grown distant from the Lannisters since Lord Arryn's death. The Stormlands might follow Stannis. The Riverlands had been ravaged by war, hardly loyal to the Iron Throne after the Red Wedding. Dorne bore old grievances with the Lannisters. Could House Tyrell sway them to join in toppling a false king? Within a fortnight, responses began to arrive. Many lords were cagey, seeking more evidence, yet increasingly, the tide turned. Small wonder, given Joffrey's cruelty and Tywin's tyranny of late. The memory of Ned Stark's execution had never fully healed in the hearts of some. Bit by bit, Margaery heard that the Lords Paramount were gathering their bannermen, uncertain if this meant war or a swift toppling of King Joffrey. Meanwhile, inside the Red Keep, Joffrey was said to be losing his mind. Servants who escaped described him rampaging through the halls, lashing out at any who even looked at him with doubt. Cersei tried to bolster him, but she herself was fraying at the edges. Jaime, whose presence had been sporadic, was rumored to be in turmoil, furious with Cersei for her failures at subterfuge, though he also might have been furious with himself. Tywin was the only one keeping them from outright collapse, but even his formidable will might not halt the turning of the tide. And though Margaery expected retribution, none came. Perhaps because the Lannisters feared turning the entire city watch, and potentially half the realm, against them. At last, a raven came from the Crownland's lesser houses, declaring they would no longer send tribute to the false king. Then more decisive news arrived. Stannis Baratheon had landed troops at Storm's End, claiming the Iron Throne for himself. He explicitly cited Joffrey's illegitimacy as the basis for his rightful claim. The realm braced for yet another war. But something surprising happened. The Tyrells had prepared a letter to Stannis, suggesting a parley. Though Margaery had no love for Stannis, it was better to see if an arrangement could be made. Days later, word came that Stannis was at least willing to negotiate. He had a grudging respect for the Tyrells' maneuver, if only because it served his own cause. Perhaps more importantly, he was short on allies and men. The War of the Five Kings had cost him much, and his resources were limited. If the Tyrells were willing to withhold their armies from fighting him, or even to lend him support, he might reward them. A meeting was set at a small fishing village on the coast outside King's Landing. A neutral ground, supposedly. Margaery insisted on going in person, despite Loras's concerns for her safety. If we do not show ourselves, Stannis will see us as cowards, she reasoned. He must see that House Tyrell stands firm and is not afraid. I will meet with him along with grandmother. Under heavy guard, they traveled by barge down the Blackwater, slipping past the mouth of the bay at dawn. The city watch turned a blind eye, quietly permitting Margaery's entourage to depart. No Lannister ships pursued them, either because Tywin had lost track of them, or because he was too busy trying to hold King's Landing together. After an hour's journey, they landed at the designated spot. A cluster of Stannis' soldiers awaited them, grim-faced men in patched armor. The red sun rose behind them, casting a stark light that caught on their spears and made them gleam. When Margaery stepped ashore, she saw Stannis waiting. The would-be king wore a close-cropped beard of iron gray, his face pinched, eyes intense. At his side stood a tall woman in red robes, Melisandre, the Red Priestess, rumored to have sinister powers. Olenna walked behind Margaery, posture straight, gaze sharp. A small honor guard of Tyrell knights accompanied them, including Loras, who eyed Stannis with open wariness. Memories of Renly's death at Stannis' hands could not be forgotten. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Stannis inclined his head stiffly. Lady Margaery Tyrell, I believe we last met when you were wed to my late brother Renly. He paused, the weight of that memory heavy between them. I trust you remember how that ended. Margaery felt a flash of anger, but she contained it, nodding. I do, Your Grace. I remember my husband, whom I believed had a rightful claim to the throne, was slain. Whether by your hand or another's, I cannot say. But it is in the past, and we stand now in a new time. She was careful with the tone she used, balancing formality and a subtle rebuke. Stannis' jaw tightened, though whether in regret or defensiveness, she could not be sure. The red woman's gaze flicked across Margaery's face. Margaery felt something unnerving in those eyes, as if 100 secret flames danced behind them, but she refused to look away. I have little taste for pleasantries, Stannis said bluntly. You have exposed the boy's illegitimacy. I would have done so long ago, if the realm had listened to me. Now the truth is out. Joffrey is no king. By the laws of succession, I am the rightful king of Westeros. You Tyrells were part of the coalition that propped up this false king. Why should I trust you now? Olenna answered calmly, her voice carrying despite her age. We supported young Joffrey because we believed it was the best path to stability for the realm and prosperity for our people. But we have seen his nature, and it is monstrous. He struck my granddaughter, threatened to flay men for idle comments, and took delight in torment. When we discovered the truth of his parentage, we acted. We have no desire to see the realm torn apart by a cruel tyrant. If you are indeed the rightful king, then perhaps we can find a common purpose. Peace, stability, and the removal of the Lannisters from power. Stannis grunted, considering. You speak of removing them, but Tywin Lannister is no fool. He will not surrender the city lightly. He will fight, and Joffrey might slaughter half the populace in his madness. I have men, but not enough to siege King's Landing for months on end. Nor do I relish seeing the city starve. I must take it quickly or not at all. Margaery took a slow breath. You require men and supplies. We have them. The Reach is the breadbasket of the Seven Kingdoms. House Tyrell can field the largest army, if we muster them. Together, we could quickly surround the city, cut off the Lannisters' lines, and force a surrender with minimal bloodshed, if we act decisively. If you will guarantee us certain protections and considerations after you take the throne, we are prepared to help you. Stannis folded his arms, expression brooding. What do you want? The Tyrells cannot expect the throne. No, Olenna cut in. We have no desire to seat ourselves on the Iron Throne, but we desire an assurance that the Tyrells will hold the Reach unchallenged, that our loyalty to you will be recognized. We also want certain offices in the new court to ensure the well-being of our family. Perhaps Margaery might be named as an advisor in matters of the small folk. Loras might have a high command in the Kingsguard or some other honorable position. We also want your word that you will not punish the Reach for having once supported Renly or Joffrey. Let the past remain the past. Stannis considered her with flinty eyes. I cannot simply forget that you once opposed me, but I do not have the men to storm King's Landing alone. You say you can help me take the city? Prove it. Gather your armies, march them north, and join me at the gates. If we manage to remove Joffrey, you shall have your demands, within reason. Olenna's mouth curved slightly. We can have a more formal negotiation, but that is the essence of it, yes. Melisandre stepped forward then, a quiet presence at Stannis's shoulder. She looked at Margaery and Olenna as if peering into their souls. The Lord of Light sees your hearts, and he shall judge if your intentions are pure. Aid the one true king in his righteous cause, and the flames shall spare you. Betray him, and you shall face shadow and fire. Margaery suppressed a shiver but managed to keep her voice steady. We are loyal to the realm's rightful king. That is all you need to know. She inclined her head. Your grace, will you accept? Stannis was silent for a moment, then gave a single curt nod. Yes, but I warn you, if the Tyrells betray me, your house will burn. I swear it. He and Olenna exchanged guarded bows, a sign of tense agreement. Margaery exhaled, feeling as if she had stepped off a cliff, hoping the wind would bear her up. She had just committed House Tyrell to an alliance with Stannis Baratheon, the very man who, by many accounts, had conjured dark forces to murder Renly. But there was no turning back. The only path to dethroning Joffrey swiftly, without a prolonged siege or more chaos, was to join Stannis's might with the Tyrells. They parted, each side bearing the weight of a new alliance sealed more by necessity than trust. Margaery led her retinue back to the barge. She heard Loras's quiet exhale, felt the tension in his posture. She clasped his hand, trying to reassure him. Neither of them mentioned Renly's name, but it lingered between them, a ghost that hovered in every glance they exchanged. On the return journey, Olenna strategized aloud, detailing how they would send ravens to Highgarden, mustering their banners for a march north. It would take time for the host to gather, but the Tyrells could move swiftly if they used gold to expedite supply lines. The key would be to converge outside King's Landing at the same moment Stannis arrived by sea and land. If they coordinated well, they might present the Lannisters with a pincer that forced them to surrender or face annihilation. Margaery felt an odd sense of relief, realizing that Joffrey's days might truly be numbered. So many nightmares she had about his cruelty and the future she would have endured as his wife. Perhaps now those nightmares would fade. Of course, no plan survived contact with the enemy unchanged. In the days and weeks that followed, Tywin Lannister attempted to fortify King's Landing, calling in every Lannister banner he could. He sent emissaries to the Westerlands, demanding additional troops. He tried to coax or threaten the houses of the Crownlands to stand by the throne, but many refused or delayed, uncertain. A volley of ravens from Cersei's cool called for the arrest of Margaery Tyrell and her grandmother as traitors, accusing them of vile conspiracies. But the city guard, fracturing in its loyalties, did not move en masse. More and more small folk turned against Joffrey, outraged by his cruelty and swayed by the incest revelation. Whispers spread, bastard born of incest, abomination, the demon boy. Meanwhile, Stannis marched from Storm's End with his host, augmented by lords of the Stormlands who, after hearing the truth, chose to rally under the rightful Baratheon banner. Margaery anxiously awaited word from Highgarden. When it finally came, it was the best news she could have hoped for. Her father Mace Tyrell had sounded the call to arms, and tens of thousands of Reachmen had assembled. They marched north at a brisk pace, sending outriders ahead to secure supply lines. Though the memory of the disastrous attempt to besiege King's Landing beside Renly haunted them, This time the city was not united under a single king. This time, the seeds of division had sprouted within the walls themselves. By the time the Tyrell host arrived in the Crownlands, the gates of King's Landing were bristling with Lannister archers, but behind them the city seethed. No joyous crowd greeted the Lannisters. No cheering throngs cried for King Joffrey. The small folk cowered or plotted, resentful and fearful. Stannis' forces arrived from the south on the same day. From her vantage on a hill, Margaery could see the banners of the Fiery Heart intermingled with the Baratheon stag. Ships in the bay bore Stannis' sigil. Loras rode beside her, scanning the horizon. Olenna stayed behind in a fortified encampment for safety, dispatching ravens and entertaining the many lords who came to see how the Tyrells would proceed. A certain hush fell over both armies as they saw each other for the first time since that uneasy alliance was formed. But there was no immediate hostility. They formed a ring around King's Landing, each camp establishing its own siege lines. Scouts reported that the Lannisters had stockpiled food and water, anticipating a siege. It could become a long standoff, but Margaery fervently hoped that the combined might of Tyrell and Baratheon armies would force a quicker end. At sunrise on the third day of the standoff, horns sounded from the walls. A small retinue emerged from the city gates under a flag of parley. Tywin Lannister, accompanied by Kevan Lannister and a cadre of red-cloaked guards. Margaery, with her father Mace, Loras, and a handful of Tyrell knights, rode out to meet them. Stannis also approached, flanked by Melisandre and the florid-faced Lord Florent, who had declared for him. They met on the wide plain before the city, the iron gate looming behind Tywin's party. The tension was palpable. Tywin, still austere and proud despite everything, reined in his horse before them. Margaery noticed lines of weariness on his face, though his eyes were like flint. It was the first time she'd confronted him so directly since the wedding feast. Stannis was the first to speak. "Lord Tywin, I see you are outnumbered. Your false king is holed up inside these walls, and half the city despises him. Yield now, and we might spare your life." Tywin's nostrils flared. "My grandson sits the Iron Throne. He is the king of Westeros by law, no matter the slander you spread." "Your grandson is the product of incest," Margaery said coldly, refusing to shrink from Tywin's glare. "We have proved this truth. The realm does not recognize him. He is no king." Tywin looked at her, and she saw genuine hatred in his eyes. "You, a slip of a girl, have cast the realm into chaos. You speak of proof, yet what is it but hearsay and letters you no doubt forged?" Stannis sneered. "Letters penned by Robert and Jon Arryn? Their handwriting is well known. And the gold cloaks whisper that you yourself have admitted as much behind closed doors, that Joffrey was not Robert's get. Why cling to a false claim now? Surrender and we might show mercy. Continue this farce and we will storm the city. The Lannister name will be ended for good." Tywin's composure did not break, but Margaery saw something flicker in his gaze. Fear or perhaps resignation. "The city is well fortified. Even with both your armies, you may lose thousands in an assault. The small folk will suffer. How will you rule over a graveyard?" Stannis' lip curled. "No doubt you counted on that. But do not forget that hunger and discontent already fester within those walls. The gold cloaks are not all loyal to you. How long before they open a gate for us? Or how long before your precious grandson murders half of them in a drunken rage? We need only wait for the city to tear itself apart from within." Margaery spoke in a measured tone. "Lord Tywin, there is no path for the Lannisters now but total destruction or honorable surrender. Choose surrender. The Tyrells will not forget the bond we once shared, but we cannot abide a false king. End this peacefully, yield the city, and perhaps your house can retain some measure of dignity in the new order." Tywin let out a bitter laugh. "A new order. So this is how it feels to be cornered by wolves from all sides. I had hoped to avoid further devastation for the realm. But you give me little choice." He swept his gaze over Stannis' lines, then the Tyrell host, then back to Margaery. "Tell me, Is there any chance that you would accept Tommen or Myrcella on the throne if Joffrey were to be discreetly set aside? We need not drag the entire family into the mud. Stannis snarled. Both are as illegitimate as Joffrey, for they share the same parents. Tywin's shoulders tightened. He studied Margaery. Do you truly want a fanatic like Stannis on the throne? Perhaps there is some other arrangement to be made. We Lannisters are resourceful. We could find a puppet with Baratheon blood, if that is all you require. This man will burn you all if he thinks his red god demands it. You might regret the monster you've welcomed. Margaery answered softly but firmly, I will not pretend that I do not fear the future under Stannis, but I fear Joffrey far more. And this is not only about fear, but legitimacy. The law of the realm supports Stannis as Robert's true heir, and the realm's lords will not abide a Lannister usurper any longer. That is the reality. Tywin pursed his lips, but said no more. He gave a curt nod. Then I see no reason to prolong this discussion. If you come for the city, you will find it well defended. Many will die. Stannis's voice was cold. That is your choice. Without further parley, Tywin turned his horse and rode back toward the gate, Kevan and the Lannister guards trailing behind. Margaery and Stannis gazed after them, each lost in thought. Then Stannis scoffed. So be it. We will show him that no walls can keep out the justice of the one true king. He rode off, returning to his lines. Margaery watched him go, feeling a chill. He was a hard, pitiless man, yet at least he was honest in his severity. She wondered what price the realm would pay now that the siege was inevitable. If the city's gates did not open quickly, thousands could die. Soldiers, small folk, and perhaps innocents trapped in the crossfire. Tywin Lannister might become desperate, or Joffrey might order the city's defenders to kill indiscriminately. The thought weighed heavily on her. As days turned to weeks, the siege tightened. Stannis' warships blockaded Blackwater Bay, preventing supplies from reaching the city by sea. The Tyrell host closed off the roads, capturing supply wagons. Margaery, from her vantage on a slope outside the walls, could watch the city through a spyglass, seeing the faint glow of torches at night and hearing occasional shouts from the ramparts. Sometimes she glimpsed Lannister banners fluttering in the breeze. She imagined Joffrey prowling the halls, raging, Cersei's furious tears, Tywin's grim strategizing, all behind those high walls. But cracks began appearing in the city's facade. One dawn, a band of gold cloaks opened a sally port and slipped away to the Tyrell lines, refusing to serve the false king any longer. They claimed Joffrey had demanded they seize suspected traitors among the small folk, planning to make an example of them by hanging them from the battlements. The gold cloaks had had enough. Such desertions, small at first, grew more frequent. A rumor that Joffrey had tortured and killed several servants in a fit of rage spread through the ranks. The red-cloaked Lannister men still guarded the main gates, but they were fewer. Tywin might have tried to keep order, but Joffrey himself seemed to be unraveling, making it impossible to mount a cohesive defense. Then, on one moonless night, a handful of gold cloaks managed to open the iron gate from within. They lit a torch as a signal, urging the besiegers to enter swiftly and take the city. If they delayed, they risked the loyalist Lannisters resecuring the gate. Word flew through the siege camps. Stannis quickly mustered his men, ordering an immediate assault. The Tyrell knights likewise prepared. In the darkness, a hush of anticipation spread through the lines. Margaery watched from a safe vantage with Olenna, her heart hammering, knowing the next hours would decide the city's fate, and possibly her own. The combined forces of Baratheon and Tyrell rushed the Iron Gate under cover of night. The defenders who remained loyal to Joffrey were caught off guard. Some fought ferociously, but the overwhelming numbers poured through. Soon, screams and steel rang out in the shadowy streets. Margaery could do little but clasp her hands together in silent prayer that the slaughter would be limited. She had no illusions that the taking of a city could ever be clean. By dawn, the gold and green banners of House Tyrell and the black stag of House Baratheon flew over much of King's Landing. Isolated pockets of Lannister resistance fought on, but they were quickly overcome. Tywin's personal guard tried to rally in the Red Keep, but rumors said Joffrey's madness had spread terror among their ranks. It did not take long for the conquering forces to converge on the great fortress. Stannis led the vanguard, determined to claim the throne himself. Loras was among those who pressed forward, though memories of Renly's murder haunted his every step. Margaery received updates from the City Watch. Cersei was barricaded in Maegor's holdfast with her son, screaming at any who dared approach. Tywin was said to be in the throne room, steel drawn, stoic to the end. The final confrontation came in the Great Hall. Margaery herself ventured inside once the fighting died down in the surrounding corridors. She walked past scorched tapestries, battered columns, torches guttered, the smell of smoke mixing with blood. There, at the foot of the Iron Throne, stood Lord Tywin, flanked by a handful of Lannister men still loyal enough to fight. The bodies of fallen defenders lay scattered. Stannis approached from the far side, sword in hand, Melisandre at his shoulder. Tyrell knights and Baratheon soldiers filled the hall, encircling Tywin's last stand. In the hush, the clank of armor and ragged breathing echoed. Margaery came to stand beside Loras, who had a cut on his brow but still stood tall, sword reddened with battle. Olenna was not there. She had remained behind with the main host, leaving the final acts to her granddaughter and grandson. Tywin eyed Margaery with a mixture of hatred and something like resignation. He addressed Stannis. "You would kill me here in this hall? You might claim your throne, but the realm will remember your cruelty." Stannis's mouth set in a grim line. "Surrender, Tywin. You cannot hold this hall with half a dozen men." Tywin drew himself up, defiant to the last. "I do not fear death, Baratheon, but I will not bend the knee to you." Even as he spoke, behind him a door slammed. A cluster of gold cloaks ushered in a bedraggled figure. Joffrey, face streaked with sweat and tears, his fine robes torn, a sword clutched in trembling hands. He stared at the assembled knights, panic wild in his eyes. "Stay back," he screeched. "I'm the king." But no one flinched. Behind him came Cersei, hair disheveled, face pale. She clutched at Joffrey's arm, trying to soothe him, or perhaps to keep him from doing something rash. Margaery felt her chest tighten at the sight of them, these last desperate remnants of a vanquished regime. Joffrey looked more like a terrified child than the monstrous king who had once tormented her. Yet she did not let pity sway her. Too many had suffered under him. Stannis lifted his sword, pointing it at Joffrey. "You are no king. Surrender." Cersei's eyes darted, mad with fear. "You dogs! You traitorous curs! My son is the rightful king." She stopped when Tywin hissed at her to be silent. Joffrey turned on Tywin, voice cracking with hysteria. "Grandfather, command them to kill these traitors. I am your king. Kill them or you'll die with them." Tywin glanced at his grandson, a bleak recognition in his face that it was all over. He closed his eyes a moment, then said quietly, "The realm knows the truth of your birth, Joffrey. We can fight no more." Joffrey froze, as though he couldn't comprehend the words. Then, with a sudden burst of rage, he lunged at Tywin, slashing wildly with his sword, screaming incoherently. Tywin, shock in his eyes, had only an instant to react. He tried to parry, but Joffrey's blade caught him in the side. The old lion staggered, blood blossoming across his tunic. Gasps echoed in the hall. The Lannister guards rushed forward, half to protect Tywin, half to restrain Joffrey. Cersei screamed. Stannis barked for men to subdue Joffrey, and a half-dozen gold cloaks leapt in, forcing him to drop his sword. He fought like a wild animal, shrieking curses. Tywin collapsed, breathing heavily, color draining from his face. Margaery stood motionless, horror mingling with a strange sense that fate was playing out a final, tragic verse. Cersei threw herself at Tywin's side, sobbing, pressing her hands to the wound. Tywin coughed, lips flecked with blood. He opened his mouth as though to speak to her, but no words came. Then, with a final breath, Tywin Lannister died, slain by the very boy he had tried to preserve on the throne. A hush, broken only by Cersei's ragged cries, fell across the hall. Stannis sheathed his sword. "Take them away," he said. "Lock them in the dungeons until their fate is decided. The city is ours." The gold cloaks dragged Joffrey off, still howling. Cersei, catatonic with grief or shock, did not resist as soldiers lifted to her feet and escorted her away. Margaery watched them vanish through the doors, her mind reeling. It was done so swiftly in the end. She approached the Iron Throne, feeling its aura of menace, the twisted swords that had taken so many lives. Stannis ascended the steps. He placed a hand on the steel arm, then turned to face the hall. Kneeling in the pooled torchlight, the men around him bowed, proclaiming, "All hail Stannis of the House Baratheon, the first of his name, King of the Undulls and the First Men." The words echoed, filling the chamber. Margaery and Loras exchanged a glance, then knelt as well. It was an uneasy loyalty they offered, but for now it was the best path. The entire realm had turned on an axis, and Joffrey's downfall was complete. In the days after the fall of King's Landing, Stannis took up residence in the Red Keep, though the fires of the siege still smoldered in parts of the city. He had many tasks: restoring order, capturing the remaining Lannister loyalists, and planning the next steps. Margaery and Olenna, with a strong retinue of Tyrell knights, were invited to remain in the city as honored guests, though Margaery suspected it was also to keep them under Stannis' scrutiny. The new king was not a man known for trust. Still, Margaery had achieved what she set out to do. Joffrey's tyranny was ended. Cersei was in chains, awaiting trial for treason, incest, and other crimes. Tommen and Myrcella, also declared illegitimate, were found in the Red Keep. Stannis, not as cruel as Joffrey, planned to send them to a remote keep where they would be kept under guard. Margaery felt a pang of pity for the younger children, but the realm could not abide them as potential claimants. On the third day of Stannis' reign, he granted a formal audience to the Tyrells in the throne room. Margaery dressed in green silk, a subtle statement of pride and power. Olenna walked with her cane, looking neither intimidated nor awed by the new king. The hall was guarded by ranks of soldiers bearing the flaming heart and stag, as well as a few Tyrell knights who had been admitted. Stannis sat on the Iron Throne, his expression carved from stone. Melisandre stood behind him, silent as a flame-haired shadow. At his side were a handful of new advisors, including Ser Davos Seaworth, whom Margaery had heard was a man of humble birth but great loyalty. The flickering torches along the walls cast dancing shadows on the iron blades. Olenna spoke first, voice strong. "Your Grace, we come to reaffirm the alliance we forged upon the field. House Tyrell stands behind you. We ask for the concessions you promised, that we might secure peace in the realm and ensure the prosperity of our people." Stannis nodded curtly. "Yes, the Tyrells have done a great service by exposing Joffrey's parentage and toppling the Lannisters' hold on the city. I acknowledge that. I will see that your house is confirmed in its rights to the Reach. Mace Tyrell will continue as Lord Paramount of the Reach, Warden of the South. In gratitude, I will also consider Ser Loras for a place among my Kingsguard, if he so desires." Loras inclined his head with surprising formality. Though he had once served in Renly's Rainbow Guard, that dream had died. Perhaps a place in Stannis' Kingsguard was a means to move forward. Olenna's eyes flicked to Margaery. "And what of my granddaughter, your Grace? She has sacrificed much to bring justice. She was promised certain considerations." Stannis seemed uneasy, shifting on the throne. "I can name her a royal advisor, or grant her a seat on the small council, if it pleases her. Yet be warned, I do not often heed counsel from many, and certainly not from those who once opposed me. But if Lady Margaery can help quell the tensions among the small folk and rebuild the city's welfare, I would grant her that role." Margaery bowed her head, though inside she felt a swirl of resolve. "I will do whatever is in my power to help restore the realm, your Grace. The city has suffered. With House Tyrell's resources, we can bring food and assistance to the starving. Ensure stability returns swiftly. I ask your blessing to begin that work at once." Stannis gave a short nod. You have it. The city needs bread, not just swords. You Tyrells excel at feeding people. Do what must be done. A slight, wry smile crossed Margaery's face. She understood that might be both an acknowledgement and a jab. He was reminding her that her place was not to rule but to aid. She accepted it for now. Better to do some good for the city than vie for more power. She had gotten what she truly wanted: Joffrey's downfall and House Tyrell's survival. Over the coming weeks, Margaery threw herself into the tasks of reconstruction, a balancing act of winning the hearts of the small folk and reassuring them that the new king would not be another tyrant. She organized the distribution of grain from the Reach, ensuring loaves were sold at fair prices, or even given freely to the most destitute. She oversaw the caring of orphans left by the siege, persuading Stannis's men to allow a portion of the Red Keep's unused rooms to house them temporarily. In so doing, she earned the cautious gratitude of the people. Meanwhile, Stannis's rule faced immediate challenges. Some houses in the Westerlands refused to yield, vowing to avenge Tywin's death and free Cersei. Skirmishes flared. The Iron Islands remained a threat, as always. Word came that in the north, strange events were unfolding with the remnants of House Stark. Still, for now, a measure of calm had returned to King's Landing. The Lannister dynasty had collapsed almost overnight, undone by the truth of Joffrey's parentage and the power of old grudges. One day, as Margaery walked the gardens that had once been hers as a betrothed queen, she was joined by Loras. He gazed at her with a certain wistful pride. "You did it, sister," he said. "You accomplished what half the realm dared not even dream, unseated a tyrant in a single stroke. Your courage sparked all of this." She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling the scent of marigolds. "I am relieved, truly, but also weary. So much blood was spilled. Some part of me wonders if there was another way, a more peaceful path." Loras gently squeezed her hand. "Perhaps not. Joffrey would never have yielded if you simply confronted him in private. And Tywin would never have let him step aside. Your choice may have saved more lives in the long run." She sighed and opened her eyes, looking at the Red Keep looming beyond the garden walls. "I hope so. Now we must see if Stannis can be a better king. He is stern, cold, and does not suffer opposition well. But if we keep him in check, if we ensure the people are fed, that the laws are just, perhaps the realm can mend." In the months to follow, Margaery learned how slowly a realm heals after revelation and war. Rebuilding took time. Executions of Lannister loyalists who refused to surrender cast a lingering pall of fear over the city. Stannis's devout new followers of the Lord of Light clashed with the faith of the Seven, adding tension. Yet amid it all, Margaery continued her work, forging new alliances, ensuring that Tyrell convoys of food arrived in the city. She even managed to speak gently with Stannis at times, urging compassion for the small folk. Although he was never warm, he slowly recognized the value of her counsel. Melisandre remained a constant, watchful presence, yet she did not interfere openly with Margaery's projects. Perhaps the Red Priestess had seen a vision that Margaery's efforts were necessary. Eventually, the city streets returned to a semblance of normal life. Markets reopened. Mummers performed once more, though they told new stories. Stories of the bastard King Joffrey undone by the rightful King Stannis and the courageous Queen Margaery. Of course, Margaery was no queen now, but some of the small folk still called her that, out of habit or fondness. She never encouraged it openly, but inside she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had not gained the crown, yet her influence upon the city was real, and her role in toppling Joffrey was whispered with admiration and awe. Thus, the realm changed one day at a time. The truth about Joffrey's parentage spread far beyond the capital, confirmed by the city's fall. The Lannisters, once unstoppable, were scattered. Some pockets of resistance flared up, but without Tywin's leadership and the gold of Casterly Rock to bribe the realm, the West gradually submitted to King Stannis. Jaime Lannister was rumored to be somewhere in the Riverlands, having refused to re-enter King's Landing after Cersei's arrest. Some whispered that he sought redemption or simply wandered in despair. In the Red Keep's darkest cells, Joffrey raged. Margaery had not visited him, nor did she particularly wish to. But she learned that he spent his days cursing, demanding, screaming that he was the king and that all would pay for this treason. His voice grew hoarse from his tirades. Cersei too remained imprisoned, broken by grief and fear, though rumor said she still clung to shards of pride, proclaiming that she had loved her children. A trial was expected, one that might end in execution or life imprisonment. During a quiet evening, weeks after the city's surrender, Margaery passed through a corridor near the dungeons on her way back from a charitable errand, distributing leftover bread from the Red Keep's kitchens. 2 guards flanked a heavy iron door, their halberds crossed. Something compelled her to pause, her eyes drifting to the torchlit passage beyond that door. She almost asked if she might see the prisoners, but she felt an icy coil in her stomach. There was nothing to be gained from watching a caged beast thrash. The Joffrey she had known, a monstrous boy with a crown, was dead the moment she exposed him to the realm. The creature in the dungeon was a husk. She turned away. She stepped out into the night air, found herself gazing at the sky. The stars glimmered, and the city below was quieter now, no screams echoing from the ramparts. Tension still existed, but it was no longer the terror of a mad boy king's whims. In the back of her mind, she recalled the day she first arrived at King's Landing, brimming with ambition and excitement to be queen. She had come so far, endured so much. She might never sit the Iron Throne or wear a crown, but she had left her mark on history. She had revealed a hidden truth that reshaped the realm. She inhaled the cool breeze, thinking of Highgarden's fragrant roses, of the future she might help forge in this once shattered city. The truth was out, and it had shattered the false monarchy. There would be plenty of struggles ahead, but at least the realm was free from Joffrey's cruelty. For this moment, she allowed herself a measure of peace, listening to the distant hum of city life as a faint, steady pulse. It was in that quiet moment that she recalled Olenna's favorite phrase, growing strong. House Tyrell had survived, grown, and endured, and with them, hopefully, the realm would find a way to grow strong once again, unshackled from lies and tyranny, set on a new course by one resounding, perilous truth. Margaery Tyrell awoke to the pale gray of an early dawn, the light falling through the tall windows of her bedchamber in the Red Keep. The night's quiet stillness lingered, broken only by the faint murmur of the city below. She sat up and wrapped a shawl about her shoulders, recalling the swirl of emotions that had beset her the evening before. Each day since the fall of King's Landing brought new challenges to the fore, demanding her steady resolve. She had achieved her goal. Joffrey's monstrous reign was ended, but the realm was far from peaceful. Now the burden of shaping the next chapter weighed upon her. She rose, bathed, and dressed without summoning any maids, preferring solitude this morning. The stark hush of the corridors stretched around her as she made her way down the winding steps. Small clusters of guards nodded respectfully at her but said nothing. The hush felt oddly comforting, if only because it was so different from the chaotic, terror-filled atmosphere that had once reigned under Joffrey. Still, she knew a new tension simmered beneath the silence, like the first sign of thunder beyond the horizon. When she reached the lower levels, she was met by her grandmother's steward, a man of middling years with carefully parted hair, who carried a neat stack of parchment. He offered a short bow. "My lady," he said quietly, "the Queen of Thorns asks you to join her in the Great Hall. A matter regarding the distribution of bread for the city's poor, and certain other news." Margaery sensed the unspoken weight behind his words. There were always certain other matters these days, matters that could not be resolved without careful thought. The city was filled with hungry people who had survived the siege and the confusion afterward. They needed more than just promises. They needed bread, shelter, and a measure of security, none of which would come swiftly after so many months of turmoil. She followed the steward along corridors newly hung with the crowned stag of House Baratheon. The halls had been partially cleared of lion banners, though some battered Lannister sigils still turned up in storerooms and remote corners. She passed a handful of Baratheon soldiers, men in old leather jerkins or battered plate. Many of them had not been part of the city watch but had marched here under Stannis's command. They regarded her as something of an unknown, once the bride of the false king, now a key ally in toppling him. Margaery felt their cautious eyes follow her, as though they were still deciding if she was friend or foe. She kept her head high. When she entered the great hall, she found it somewhat transformed. The floor was scrubbed of the bloodstains from the final battle. The pillars were chipped and cracked in places where swords and arrows had struck, but it still bore a sense of austere grandeur. At the far end, the Iron Throne loomed like a twisted nightmare of metal, no longer dwarfed by any Lannister finery. A dais had been set up before it for the morning's business, with a high-backed chair that Stannis used in place of the throne when dispensing justice or hearing petitions. Closer to the entrance, several trestle tables were arranged in a horseshoe, scattered with parchments and half-written letters. A handful of quills and pots of ink were perched on top, and a few scribes, bearing the sigil of House Baratheon, busied themselves by copying official decrees. In the midst of this bustle, Olenna Tyrell stood near one of the tables, conferring quietly with a pair of Tyrell bannermen. Her cane rested against the table's edge, though she seldom seemed to need its support, managing to project her usual upright bearing. She looked up at Margaery's approach and waved her over. "Ah, you're here at last," she said briskly. "I've been discussing matters of supply and coin with these gentlemen, but we need you to smooth out some wrinkles with the king's new stewards. Stannis insists on a thorough accounting of how we distribute food. Unreasonable man, as though we'd hoard bread in a dungeon just to amuse ourselves." One of the Tyrell bannermen, a tall man with a soft beard, offered Margaery a respectful bow. "We've brought a fresh convoy of grain from the Reach, but the king's men want to weigh every last sack before it's turned over to the bakers. It's slowing our deliveries. The folk in Flea Bottom grow restless, and small riots flare whenever the bread runs out." Margaery nodded. "I see. The king is known for his strict sense of order. But we can find a solution that satisfies him and ensures swifter relief for the small folk. Have the stewards meet me in an hour, perhaps in the courtyard, where we can demonstrate the distribution ourselves." The bannerman breathed a sigh of relief, thanked her, and departed with the other Tyrell retainer to finalize details. Olenna watched them go, lips pursed in mild annoyance. Stannis wishes to appear incorruptible, but if he's not careful, his own men will starve half the city while fussing with ledgers. Margaery offered a small smile. "We'll handle it, grandmother." Before Olenna could reply, the steward approached again, carrying another document with fresh ribbons. "My lady," he murmured to Olenna, "the king's court has issued a summons for the midday hour. It concerns the trial preparations." Olenna's eyebrow arched. "Which trial? There are so many these days. Petty lords who refuse to yield, gold cloaks who changed sides thrice. It's like a flock of vultures picking at the leftover carrion." The steward coughed. "It concerns the trial of Queen Cersei Lannister, my lady. They wish to set a date and begin formal proceedings. The charges are numerous, including high treason and murder conspiracies. As you know, King Stannis is assembling a panel of lords and septons to hear the evidence." Margaery felt her stomach tighten. Though she had played no small role in bringing Cersei to ruin, she could not deny a sense of lingering discomfort at the thought of witnessing that woman stand trial. The bitterness between them had been vicious. Cersei had tried to have Margaery destroyed through subterfuge and intimidation. Yet some part of Margaery felt a flicker of pity for the woman's desperation. The memory of Cersei weeping over Tywin's body and gripping Joffrey's arm in the throne room was not so easily dismissed. But pity or no pity, the realm demanded justice, and so she nodded solemnly. "Very well. The city has waited a long time to see justice done to the Lannisters. Let them have their day in court." Olenna snorted softly. "And we shall see if the infamous incest is enumerated among the charges or simply treated as part of the treason. The faith will have plenty to say about it, no doubt." She tapped her cane. "You will attend, child?" Margaery paused, then nodded. "I must. This entire saga began with my revealing the truth of their crimes. I cannot shirk from the final reckoning. Besides, if Stannis forms a panel of lords and ladies to bear witness or pass judgment, the Tyrells ought to be represented." "Very well," Olenna said, her voice gentler than usual. "Just prepare yourself. She will likely lash out at you. Mad lions still have claws." Margaery inclined her head, though she felt that old coil of tension in her chest. "I am ready." They parted ways briefly, each carrying on with the day's endless obligations. Margaery spent the morning navigating a tangle of arguments between the king's stewards and the Tyrell quartermasters over how best to weigh and distribute the grain shipments. She recognized that Stannis's men likely remembered the lavish displays of wealth the Tyrells had once used to buy alliances, and so they worried about hidden duplicity. She patiently explained that her priority was to feed the city, not to hoard gold. By the end, they reached a workable system of tallies and distribution points. Margaery left them with instructions to expedite supplies in Flea Bottom, where the hungry were most numerous. She felt a measure of satisfaction that at least some progress had been made without angering Stannis or letting the small folk starve in the interim. At midday, horns sounded from the Red Keep's interior courtyard, calling those lords, ladies, and officials who had been summoned to the Great Hall to convene. Margaery joined Olenna and Loras, accompanied by a small retinue of Tyrell guards. They moved through the corridors toward the Great Hall, a current of tension in the air. Word had traveled swiftly. The trial of Cersei Lannister was beginning. The small folk spoke of it in huddled whispers, while the nobility wore guarded expressions, uncertain how harsh King Stannis would be or whether more secrets might be exposed. The Great Hall's doors stood open, revealing an interior thick with watchers. Armed guards stood in neat lines along the walls, bearing either the crowned stag of Baratheon or the golden rose of Tyrell. Even a few soldiers wearing the sigil of House Florent were present, reflecting Stannis's extended alliances among the Stormlands and Reach. At the far end, the Iron Throne loomed, and upon its steps sat Stannis, flanked by Melisandre and Ser Davos Seaworth. Before him, a semicircle of chairs had been arranged for those who would sit in judgment. A panel that included several highborn lords, 2 septons, and, by arrangement, representatives from the major houses allied to Stannis. In practice, Stannis would dominate the proceedings, but the presence of these judges gave an air of legitimacy that he plainly valued. Margaery scanned the seats. Her father, Mace Tyrell, was there, looking uncharacteristically serious. A high septon, appointed in the chaos after the previous one's questionable death, sat in pale robes. Lord Estermont, a cousin of Stannis, lounged with an austere expression. Lord Caron and Lady Oakhart were there too, having declared for Stannis. Even the new commander of the City Watch had a seat, though somewhat removed, to represent the city's voice. Olenna beckoned Margaery forward. They were guided by an usher to places near the dais, just behind Mace Tyrell. When all were settled, the herald rapped a staff on the floor, and the hall quieted. "Bring forth the accused," he called, voice echoing through the vaulted chamber. "Queen, formerly Queen Cersei of House Lannister, to stand trial for high treason, incest, regicide, conspiracy to murder, and other crimes as named in the charges." A ripple of murmurs washed over the assembled crowd. Then, from the far side of the hall, a door opened, for guards escorted Cersei inward. She wore a plain gown of gray, her once lustrous hair cut to a rough shoulder length, her face gaunt with exhaustion. Chains around her wrists clinked with every step. Gone was the commanding presence of the Lioness of House Lannister, replaced by a hollow-eyed woman whose posture wavered between defiance and despair. Murmurs buzzed as she was led to stand before the dais. One of the septons rose, clearing his throat. "Cersei Lannister, you stand accused of grave sins against the laws of the Seven Kingdoms. The panel assembled here shall hear evidence and render judgment. If you wish to speak in your defense, you may do so." Cersei lifted her chin, eyes flicking from the septon to Stannis, then to the rows of watchers. Her gaze lingered on Margaery with a flash of deep hatred before she looked away. "I stand accused under false pretenses," she said, her voice trembling at first, then growing in volume. "Treason? Incest? These are vile lies spread by traitors who wish to destroy my house. I am the rightful queen and Joffrey was the rightful king. All else is slander." Stannis's expression did not soften. Your house's downfall is plain. We have reams of evidence proving that Joffrey Baratheon was no true son of King Robert. Your father, Lord Tywin, tried to keep you safe by forging alliances and crushing dissent. But now we have your brother's confessions. You lie! Cersei shrieked, nearly launching herself forward, but the guards tightened their grip on her chains. Jaime would never betray me. Stannis exchanged a glance with Ser Davos. Then he turned back to Cersei. Your brother was captured by forces in the Riverlands. According to the ravens we have received, Jaime Lannister confessed to fathering Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen. Whether he did so willingly or under threat is another matter. But the words are written and sealed by lords who hold him. Confirms everything we already knew. Even your father, in his final moments, acknowledged the bastard status of the boy you propped up as king. Cersei's face twisted, and for a moment she looked as though she might collapse. The entire hall buzzed with shock at the mention that Jaime had evidently given a confession from somewhere in the Riverlands. Margaery, too, felt a pang of surprise. She had known Jaime roamed abroad, but not that he had been taken captive and forced to speak. Yet if that was true, if the letter truly existed, it was one more link in the chain of proof that destroyed Cersei's defense. A hush fell as the High Septon read out a list of charges in a droning voice, describing how Cersei had polluted the sanctity of marriage, sired children in defiance of the gods' laws, and conspired to kill King Robert Baratheon and others who threatened her secrets. The list went on, including smaller, specific charges, such as ordering the wrongful arrest of Eddard Stark and orchestrating or abetting numerous atrocities in King's Landing. Cersei stood throughout, trembling, fury warring with a kind of bleak hopelessness in her eyes. Finally, Stannis spoke. Cersei Lannister, the crimes laid at your feet would see you executed 100 times over, were it possible. Do you deny them all? She pressed her lips together, tears brimming. Then she spat. I deny your authority, false king. I do not recognize you as my judge. Only the gods and the realm have that right, and the realm belonged to Joffrey. Stannis's voice lashed out like a whip. Silence. The realm was never Joffrey's. You dare speak of the gods' laws? You, who defied both man and deity in your incestuous couplings and treasons. We have more than enough witness to your guilt. Lord Arryn and King Robert themselves suspected the truth long before either died. Your father, your brother, your own actions confirm it beyond doubt. The world knows. Cersei's breath caught in ragged sobs as she turned to the Watchers, a final, desperate attempt to muster her old arrogance. All of you, do you believe this wretched lie? I gave everything for my children, and this is how I am repaid. Her gaze fell for a moment on Margaery, her voice turning venomous. You orchestrated all this. Do you think you'll be safe under Stannis's iron fist? He'll cast you aside the moment you cease to be useful, and you will regret tearing down the Lannisters. My family, your family is in ruins, Olenna Tyrell said coolly from the judge's row, cutting through the hush. She leaned on her cane, eyes narrowing. We all saw what you made of King's Landing, Cersei. You let your son roam free to torture and kill. You devoured the realm's coffers, hurling gold at your whim. You persecuted those who dared question you. You have only yourself to blame. Cersei let out a ragged cry, then bowed her head, shoulders trembling. The hush in the hall grew heavy. Stannis exchanged a glance with the Septons, then nodded. We have heard enough. The panel will confer on the matter of sentencing. A handful of murmured conversations followed as Mace Tyrell, the High Septon, and several other judges stepped aside to form a small circle. They spoke in low tones, occasionally casting glances at Cersei. The hush among the spectators was unnerving. Margaery's heart pounded, though she refused to look away. She felt no joy in this, but she knew that it had to be done. The realm demanded justice. If Cersei went unpunished, how could any new king claim legitimacy? The consultation ended swiftly. The High Septon cleared his throat, stepping forward. His voice was solemn but resonant as it filled the hall. It is the decision of this panel that the accused Cersei Lannister, is guilty of high treason, incest, and the many crimes enumerated. For these offenses against gods and men, the recommended sentence is death. A shockwave of whispers ran through the onlookers. Some in the crowd looked on with grim satisfaction. Others cast their eyes down, uneasy. Cersei froze, face going ashen. Then she erupted in a wail of furious denial, screaming curses at the assembled lords, at Margaery, at the Tyrells, even at Stannis. Guards seized her, holding her fast. Tears streaked her cheeks, and her voice cracked as she shouted, "I am the Queen! I am the Queen!" The outburst descended into strangled sobs that echoed in the vaulted hall. Stannis, unyielding, rose from the Iron Throne steps. "So be it. The justice of the realm demands her life. Yet I know the gods weigh mercy as well. If the panel sees fit, we might allow her the option of a quick execution by the sword or the alternative of a trial by battle. But as Jaime Lannister is not here, and no knight in King's Landing would champion this woman, that option would be purely symbolic. She stands alone. Should she find a champion within a fortnight, we will allow it. If none appear, the sentence stands, and she will die." Despite the hush, a ripple of cynicism passed through the watchers. Who among the living would dare to fight for Cersei Lannister now, especially with her father gone, her family scattered? Jaime might have once taken up her cause, but he was reportedly a captive in the Riverlands. If rumors were true, he might well face his own trial soon. Tyrion Lannister, exiled or vanished, was in no position to help. None of the Lannister bannermen who survived had any illusions about risking their necks for a lost cause. Cersei's fate was sealed, no matter what flicker of hope the notion of trial by combat offered. Cersei, half swooning in the guard's arms, seemed barely aware of Stannis's pronouncement. Her eyes darted wildly, her lips parted in an agonized moan. At last, with a curt gesture from Stannis, the guards dragged her away from the hall, back to the darkness of her cell. The watchers remained hushed. Many stared at Margaery, as if to gauge her reaction. She merely clasped her hands before her, face schooled into composure. The great hall fell into a tense murmur as the crowd dispersed. Some of the watchers drifted outside to gossip and rehash every word. Margaery stepped aside, feeling the swirl of conflicting emotions. She felt Loras at her shoulder, and Olenna's presence on her other side. Loras gave Margaery's arm a gentle squeeze. "Are you well, sister?" She let out a breath. "Yes, or at least as well as can be expected. I once would have thought to see Cersei undone would bring me relief, but it is a bitter victory." Her voice faltered. "It still feels like a tragedy. For all that she deserved it." Olenna patted her hand. "Power often ends in tragedy, child. You did what was necessary for the realm. Let us not dwell on pity for a woman who tried to have you killed." Margaery nodded, but her mood remained somber. "We should speak with Stannis or perhaps with Ser Davos. We need to ensure that all this unrest doesn't spark more chaos in the city." They moved toward the dais. Stannis stood in hushed conversation with Melisandre, the Red Priestess's gaze drifting around the hall with a distant air. Ser Davos was nearby, listening intently. At Margaery's approach, Stannis looked up, his face a carved mask of severity. "Lady Margaery," he said curtly, "I trust you do not dispute the sentence." She shook her head. "No, Your Grace. I merely wanted to suggest that the city's morale might be fragile. Cersei's condemnation was expected, but still I worry about violent reprisals. Many among the small folk suffered under the Lannisters. Some might seek vengeance by attacking anyone they believe was close to her. Others may try to undermine your rule, claiming you kill all foes." Stannis considered her words with cool eyes. "I will not coddle traitors and murderers to appease the rabble, but you speak truly that the city's mood is precarious. I shall command the city watch to keep order. If you have additional measures in mind, share them with Ser Davos." Ser Davos nodded to Margaery. "I'll do what I can, my lady." Margaery inclined her head in thanks. Olenna stood by, silent, though her gaze flicked over Melisandre warily. The Red Priestess regarded them both with that eerie calm, then gave a small incline of her head, as if acknowledging their presence without words. Margaery had grown used to the woman's silent scrutiny, but it still unsettled her. When they withdrew from the dais, Olenna exhaled sharply. That's done, then. Another lion caged and awaiting the axe. Now we have to handle the real business of ruling. Stannis might claim the throne, but we both know the city needs stability that only we Tyrells can help provide. Margaery sighed. Yes, let's see to it. Perhaps, with the threat of the Lannisters fading, we can turn more attention to feeding the people and re-establishing trade. The realm needs peace. They exited the hall, stepping out into bright midday sunshine that spilled over the Red Keep's inner courtyard. People bustled to and fro, some with anxious expressions, others with relief. Word of Cersei's sentencing was already spreading. Margaery caught snippets of conversation. She'll burn, she will. The Red God'll see to that. No, the king'll behead her, like a traitor. Serves that incestuous wretch right. My cousin lost a hand on her orders. Margaery pressed her lips together, trying to ignore the gleeful venom in some voices. The hatred that Cersei had sown now came pouring back upon her. It could become a new wave of violence if not carefully managed. She and Olenna conferred in private with a cluster of Tyrell bannermen, establishing a plan to expand patrols in the city's poorest wards. Tyrell men wearing the rose, but under instructions to intervene only if the Watch requested help. The idea was to show the small folk that House Tyrell intended to keep them safe, not let them tear each other apart in vengeful riots. Meanwhile, Loras was dispatched to speak with certain key merchants, promising them that more shipments from the Reach would stabilize bread prices and help quell unrest. Through the afternoon, Margaery found little time to eat or rest, flitting from one meeting to the next. She oversaw the final sign-off on a set of orders for additional wagons of grain. She listened to a proposed agreement with the Iron Bank of Bravos. Stannis wanted to rebuild a functional royal treasury, and the Tyrell support was crucial for negotiating favorable terms. Every step forward required a delicate balance. Stannis insisted on being recognized as absolute king, while Margaery and Olenna maneuvered to ensure that House Tyrell would not be overshadowed in the new regime. By evening, Margaery was exhausted but determined to continue. She paused only to take a light supper in her solar, nibbling bread and cheese, sipping watered wine. Then she met Loras again for a final walk through the Red Keep's corridors, checking in with the Tyrell guards stationed there. Even now, after their victory, the Red Keep still felt like a labyrinth of dangers. Ghosts of the past seemed to linger at every turn. Servants who once turned a blind eye to Joffrey's cruelties, courtiers who might bear grudges, shadows and corners that might hide assassins. Margaery knew it was wise to remain vigilant. When they reached a small balcony overlooking the Blackwater Bay, they halted for a moment to take in the night air. Torches glimmered along the walls of the city, a faint reflection dancing on the dark water. Loras leaned on the stone parapet, exhaling. I heard that tomorrow, Stannis is set to review the gold cloaks that remain in the city. He wants to ensure no pockets of Lannister loyalty remain. I wonder if that will cause more friction. Margaery gazed out at the bay, the salt-tinged breeze stirring her brown curls. It might, but the gold cloaks have grown weary of changing loyalties. After all the turmoil, most of them simply want peace and a steady wage. House Lannister can offer them nothing now. True, Loras said. Then his brow tightened. But what of the rumors about the West? I hear that Lannister bannermen who survived the city's fall are regrouping in the Westerlands, seeking to rally behind Kevan Lannister or perhaps that distant cousin, Davin Lannister. If they muster enough forces, they might challenge Stannis. Margaery frowned. I've heard the same. It's possible they'll attempt to reclaim influence. Though with Tywin gone, their leadership is in disarray. Even if the Westerlands gather men, they'll face a united front from us and from Stannis. The city will not be so easily recaptured. Loras gave a reluctant nod. And what of Joffrey? In the dungeons? His voice quavered slightly with an old anger. Has there been any word on what's to be done with him? A chill ran through Margaery. In truth, she had been trying not to think about Joffrey. He was, in many ways, more monstrous than Cersei. At least Cersei, for all her crimes, had loved her children in her own twisted way. But Joffrey had loved only himself and his power. Stannis's new hand, Ser Davos, had confided that they were uncertain how to handle the boy. He was guilty of countless cruelties, but they feared a public spectacle of his execution might inflame some portion of the city or the realm. Others argued that he was no child but a monster who deserved no mercy. Rumor said he spent his days shrieking in the dungeons, demanding his crown. "No official announcement yet," Margaery said quietly. "I expect they will formalize charges against him soon, as they did with Cersei. But part of me wonders if Stannis wants to avoid giving him a trial by combat that might stir up more chaos. If it were up to me..." Her voice caught. She pressed her lips together. "He should face justice. But I won't pretend I relish the thought of more bloodshed." Loras's gaze drifted to the distant flickers of light on the bay. "I don't relish it either, but I cannot forget how he tormented Sansa Stark, how he humiliated us all during the wedding fiasco, how he threatened you." His knuckles whitened on the balcony's edge. "He's only grown worse in captivity, from what I've heard." They both lapsed into silence. Beneath them, the waters of the Blackwater lapped softly at the quay. Finally, Margaery turned away, touching Loras's arm gently. "We can speak more of it in the morning. Let us rest. We must be prepared for whatever storms tomorrow brings." They parted. Margaery returned to her chamber and, after dismissing her maids, she stared at her reflection in the polished mirror for a long while. She saw not the blushing bride who once believed she could charm a monster into gentleness, but a woman tempered by secrets and war. A part of her longed for the quiet gardens of High Garden, the fragrance of roses, the gentle hush of the Mander flowing past. But she knew that path was lost to her, for now. She was too deeply intertwined in the power struggles of King's Landing, and the realm needed her influence. With a quiet sigh, she removed her jewelry, braided her hair, and fell into a fitful sleep. Come morning, a messenger arrived with summons for Margaery from King Stannis himself. The day was barely begun. Sunbeams angled through the windows, and the city's roosters had only just finished crowing. Margaery hastily dressed and made her way to the council chambers, a smaller room adjacent to the throne room that Stannis had claimed for gatherings of his inner circle. She wondered what new crisis demanded urgent attention. She found the council chambers occupied by Stannis, Melisandre, Ser Davos, and a handful of lesser lords who had pledged fealty. Maps were spread across a long oak table. Stannis looked up from a sheaf of parchment as she entered, his face grim. "Lady Margaery, I require your counsel on a matter of the city and the realm." She inclined her head. "I am at your service, your grace." Sta. Nyes gestured for her to step closer and pointed to a sealed letter on the table. "Word has come from the Vale of Arryn. There are rumors that Petyr Baelish, Lord Protector of the Vale, has heard of the Lannisters' fall and contemplates forging an alliance with certain rebel lords in the Westerlands. It seems he's playing his usual games, hoping to profit from chaos. If that is so, we risk a two-front conflict. The Vale's knights striking from the east, the Westerlands from the west." Margaery felt a twinge of unease. Petyr Baelish had always been a cunning manipulator, weaving half-truths and alliances for his own gain. It was entirely plausible that he might see advantage in supporting a Lannister resurgence, or at least in threatening King's Landing to extract concessions. "Have the Lords of the Vale confirmed this?" she asked. Ser Davos shook his head. "No. We only have word from a handful of merchants who traveled from Gulltown. The official stance of the Vale is that they remain neutral. But Baelish is known to do as he pleases behind the scenes." Stannis tapped the table with a gauntlet finger. "We cannot leave that viper at our flank. If the Vale's knights ride with the West, we could be pincered. Our hold on King's Landing is secure for now, but a pincer could strangle supply lines. The city might once again face siege from both sides." Margaery leaned forward, scanning the map. The Vale, with its mountainous passes, had always been a near-impenetrable region unless the lords there chose to march out. Littlefinger's cunning might persuade them to do exactly that, or at least keep the threat alive as a bargaining chip. "We must consider how to forestall him," she said. "Is there a way to draw the Vale to our side? Or at least keep them from acting openly against us?" Stannis frowned. "We cannot simply bribe or flatter them. The Vale's lords are proud, and Baelish is sly. If I marched the royal host north to the Bloody Gate, I might force them into submission. But that would leave King's Landing vulnerable, and the West might exploit my absence." Davos cleared his throat. "There is another possibility. We might seek an alliance with the Lady of the Eyrie, Lisa Arryn, if she still holds any real power. But she's said to be enthralled by Baelish. Alternatively, we could approach the Vale's other influential lords, such as Lord Royce or Lady Waynwood, encouraging them to break with Baelish. If they refuse him, the Vale can remain neutral or even side with us." Margaery considered. "I know from gossip that Lisa Arryn is temperamental. She might not be easily swayed. But the lords of the Vale are honorable folk. They might not approve of Baelish's machinations. If we provide them with clear reason to see Stannis as the rightful king, and if we can guarantee them some benefit or protection, they might be convinced that aiding a Lannister resurgence is folly." Stannis nodded. "Then we must send an envoy. Not a troop of soldiers, but someone who can negotiate from strength. Someone the Vale lords will respect." Davos glanced at Margaery. "Might I suggest that a Tyrell envoy could be suitable? House Tyrell is wealthy and commands great respect now that you have helped place Stannis on the throne. The Vale's lords might see an alliance with the Tyrells as advantageous." Stannis turned to Margaery, expression unreadable. "Would you be willing to travel to the Vale, Lady Margaery? You know how to speak softly but carry weight. You exposed the Lannisters. That deed alone might command interest from those who fear or loathe Littlefinger's manipulations. If you can keep the Vale from aligning with him, you serve the realm." Margaery's heart fluttered with surprise. She had not expected Stannis to entrust her with a diplomatic mission of such importance. Still, the idea of leaving King's Landing at a time when it was so precarious made her uneasy. On the other hand, if she succeeded, she could protect the city from the threat of a second war. "It would be an honor," she said slowly. "But let me speak with my grandmother and my brother first. We must be certain King's Landing remains stable in our absence." Stannis inclined his head. "Of course, but time is of the essence. We cannot let Baelish gather allies unopposed." With that, the meeting ended. Margaery left the council chamber, thoughts racing. She found Olenna and Loras together in a small antechamber, reviewing yet another set of supply tallies. They both looked up at her approach, and she relayed the gist of Stannis's proposal. Olenna's lips pressed into a thin line. "The Vale? Baelish? That cunning little weasel. I'd sooner trust a scorpion not to sting." "Yes," Margaery agreed. "But if we fail to address him, we risk a new war on our doorstep. Stannis wants me to go as an envoy." "Of course he does," Olenna muttered, a note of wry sarcasm in her tone. "He's realized your talents are needed to negotiate while he stands here scowling on that iron monstrosity, and you're the best we've got. I can't exactly go climbing the Ares Mountains at my age." Loras looked uneasy. "Is it wise to split our strength? If Margaery departs, who remains here to safeguard House Tyrell's interests in King's Landing?" "Grandmother, you are formidable. But I'll be fine," Olenna snapped, though not unkindly. She softened her expression. "You, dear boy, are perhaps needed in the city's guard to keep the peace. Or perhaps you should accompany your sister. If the road is dangerous, you might defend her." Margaery placed a hand on Loras's. "In truth, having you by my side might help. The Knights of the Vale respect martial prowess, and your name is known. But Stannis might be reluctant to spare both of us, especially if he hopes you'll remain here to ensure the city's security. We have to weigh what is best for the realm and for our family." They conferred for the better part of an hour. Olenna reasoned that Mace Tyrell was still in King's Landing, with enough men to protect Tyrell interests. Loras, for his part, was a renowned knight and could lend authority to any negotiation. In the end, they decided it would be best if Loras accompanied Margaery, leading a modest escort of Tyrell men. Olenna would remain in the city to keep a watchful eye on court politics. With that settled, Margaery asked Loras to request an audience with Stannis to confirm their plan. Then she immersed herself in preparations, calling for maps of the Vale, reviewing accounts of its lords and their heraldry. The Vale had long been in partial seclusion since the death of Jon Arryn, father to the boy Robert Arryn, and husband to Lisa. Baelish had insinuated himself there by marrying Lisa. Now the boy was lord of the Eyrie, but Baelish was pulling the strings, or so rumor claimed. Word arrived that Stannis approved the plan. "Travel swiftly," his missive read. "Secure the Vale. Return with tidings that it shall not stand against us." He sealed it with the crowned stag. Margaery noted the subtext. Fail, and the city could be imperiled anew. She pushed away the flicker of anxiety and reminded herself that negotiations were her strength, so long as she did not underestimate Peter Baelish. The next morning, Margaery and Loras donned their traveling cloaks and prepared to depart. They would ride north from King's Landing along the Rosby Road, then cut east to Maidenpool, skirting the edges of crackling conflicts still rumored in the Riverlands. From Maidenpool, they would head north to the Bloody Gate, the main entrance to the Vale. A small retinue of Tyrell knights and servants accompanied them, along with a few supply wagons. Olenna gave Margaery a final embrace in the courtyard. "Be careful," she said, "and remember that Baelish is cunning. You'll need to watch for every subtle hint of his intentions." Margaery squeezed her grandmother's hand. "I will, and I'll send ravens as soon as we know more." Olenna nodded and stepped back. The dawn was still new, casting soft light across the courtyard. Margaery mounted her mare, a graceful brown courser from Highgarden stables, while Loras swung onto a spirited white stallion. Tyrell men in green and gold cloaks waited behind them. Guards on the walls lifted the gates, and with that, the party set out through the city. People paused to watch as they rode. Some recognized Margaery from her charitable efforts and bowed respectfully. Others simply murmured, eager to see new developments. In an odd way, she felt a pang of nostalgia. The city had become a place where she had fought, lost illusions, and found new purpose. Yet now she was leaving again, perhaps to forge a peace that could save it from more conflict. Once they passed through the gate, the open road stretched before them, flanked by farmland that still bore scars of war, burned barns, trampled fields. But at least the main route was safe enough now that bandits had been largely driven out by Stannis's and Tyrell patrols. Margaery urged her horse to a steady canter, determined to make good time. She carried letters of safe passage sealed by the king, though she knew that in these uncertain times, any official letter was only as good as the swords that defended it. They rode for days, halting each evening at whatever inn or holdfast could offer them a roof and some semblance of protection. Loras kept careful watch, mindful of the possibility that remnants of Lannister loyalists or other brigands might try to capture them. But the journey was mostly uneventful. Occasionally, they encountered small folk who recognized the Tyrell banners and asked anxiously about the news from King's Landing. Margaery offered what reassurances she could. The Lannisters were broken, Stannis Baratheon had taken the throne, the city was beginning to recover. She noticed that some folk did not appear entirely relieved by mention of Stannis. They had heard rumors of the Red God, or the harshness of his justice. But they seemed to trust Margaery, if only because she brought them tidings of bread and peace. When they reached Maidenpool, they found that the small port town was slowly rebuilding after the ravages of previous wars. The lord there, Mutun, greeted them with caution but granted them lodging in his keep for 2 nights. He had declared for Stannis after hearing of Joffrey's incest, but he remained apprehensive, uncertain of whether the war was truly over. Margaery tried to reassure him in the presence of Loras. "If the Vale can be coaxed to remain neutral or join us, and if the West does not rise under a new Lannister pretender, we might see real peace." Lord Mutun nodded, though his wariness did not entirely fade. "I'll hope your words ring true, Lady Margaery." Too many times have we in the Riverlands been bled by the quarrels of kings. Margaery offered a sympathetic smile, promising that the Tyrells would do their utmost to preserve stability. They pressed on, following the road north along the coast before turning inland toward the Vale. The land grew rockier with foothills rising. Autumn was creeping in, leaves turning red and gold in the forests. Chill winds swept down from the mountains. On the 10th day out of King's Landing, they caught sight of the towering peaks of the Vale far ahead, spearing into the sky like jagged teeth. The pass known as the Bloody Gate, a fortress straddling the narrow defile that led into the Vale proper, lay just beyond. They made camp that night near an abandoned watchtower, building fires to ward off the cold. Margaery stood at the edge of camp, arms wrapped around herself as she gazed at the distant silhouettes of the mountains. Loras joined her, cloak billowing behind him in the breeze. He said quietly, "I've heard the Vale is breathtaking once you're inside, fertile valleys surrounded by impassable peaks. And high above all, the Eyrie stands perched like an eagle's nest. If we go that far, we'll need to climb a mountain path on foot or mule, they say. Some say the path is perilous, especially if the lords within do not welcome you." Margaery nodded. "I've heard the same, but we can start with the Bloody Gate. If we're barred entry there, we'll have our answer soon enough about Baelish's intentions. If we're welcomed, we'll see if we can gather the Vale's lords for talks." Loras's jaw tightened. "And if Baelish tries to keep you hostage, or spin some web of schemes to manipulate you?" She managed a smile. "I trust you and our knights to see that doesn't happen, and I can handle Lord Baelish in discourse. I've done so before in King's Landing, albeit briefly. He's a master of half-truths and sly insinuations, but I've learned a trick or two myself." They stood there, side by side, until the chill wind made them return to the warmth of the camp. That night, Margaery slept lightly, stirring at every odd rustle. She dreamed of King's Landing in flames, with lions and stags and roses swirling in a dire tapestry of conflict. She dreamed of Peter Baelish, whispering secrets in her ear as the floor fell away beneath her feet. She awoke with her heart pounding, telling herself it was only a dream. At dawn, they broke camp and continued up the winding approach to the pass. Near midday, a cry went up from the vanguard. A small garrison stood on a rocky outcrop ahead, blocking the road. Banner-bearers waved the moon and falcon sigil of House Arryn, signifying the Vale's guardians. Loras and Margaery exchanged looks, then rode forward calmly, letting the Tyrell banner behind them flutter in the breeze. As they drew near, a half-dozen mailed men stepped forward, swords sheathed but hands hovering near the hilts. "Halt!" the guard captain called. "State your business. No one enters the Vale unannounced." Loras reined in. "We are an envoy from King Stannis Baratheon, rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms, led by Lady Margaery Tyrell. We request safe passage to meet with Lord Protector Peter Baelish and the lords of the Vale." The guard captain frowned, eyeing their party. "We've received no word of your coming. We'll send a rider to the Bloody Gate and see if they'll let you pass." Margaery guided her mare forward another step, her tone calm. "We bear letters from King Stannis, and we come in peace to parley. We have no desire for conflict, only to speak with Lord Baelish and ensure the Vale's well-being." The guard captain hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. You may wait here while our messenger rides ahead. If the Vale's lord gives leave, you'll be escorted through the pass." They dismounted, settling into a tense pause. Margaery waited near the front with Loras while a single rider galloped up the steep road. She could see the fortress known as the Bloody Gate looming in the distance, perched between two towering cliffs. The approach was narrow enough for a handful of knights to hold off an army. If Baelish wanted to deny them entry, he could do so easily. Time crawled. The Tyrell knights stood in a wary formation, the Vale guards watching them from across a short gap. Margaery could almost taste the tension in the air. At last, hoofbeats announced the messenger's return. The soldier reined in, breathing hard, and muttered something to the guard captain. The man nodded, then addressed Margaery and Loras. "Lord Baelish grants you entry, under the condition that your retinue remains small. Only a dozen men with you. The rest must wait at the gate or return from whence they came. Margaery's stomach gave a nervous twist. A smaller escort would leave them vulnerable if Baelish meant betrayal. But refusing might lead to an impasse or worse. She shared a glance with Loras. He looked grim but nodded. We'll not turn back now. We'll bring our best knights. Enough to protect you if it comes to that. All right, Margaery said softly. Then she told the guard captain, we agree. A dozen of ours shall ride. The rest will wait at the bloody gate. So it was done. They reorganized swiftly. A portion of the Tyrell men, those Loras trusted least to maintain calm in close quarters, would remain at the outpost. Another half-dozen, carefully chosen knights loyal to House Tyrell, would accompany them. Their supply wagons would remain behind, guarded, until permission was given to bring them through. Margaery felt a pang of apprehension leaving behind such resources, but she also understood that pushing the Vale's guardians now would lead nowhere. With the arrangements made, they proceeded up the winding road, passing through the first set of gates and then the second. The fortress overshadowed them, tall stone walls built across the narrow pass, archers stationed at intervals. Margaery heard the faint rush of mountain winds swirling in the high peaks above. A gatekeeper peered down from a parapet, then swung open the heavy iron portcullis. One by one, Margaery, Loras, and their chosen knights entered the Vale of Arryn. The path beyond opened onto a breathtaking vista. Sheer mountains rose on either side, their slopes thick with pine trees. Below, a valley spread out, green and lush, dotted with small hamlets and fields that seemed untouched by war. High overhead, hawks circled in the crisp blue sky. It was a land of stunning contrasts, impossibly steep crags sheltering pockets of rich farmland. Margaery drew a breath, feeling a twinge of awe at the Vale's natural splendor. They followed a guide sent by Baelish, a lean man in Arryn livery, who led them along a winding mountain road. He told them that they would stop at the Gates of the Moon, a castle at the foot of the Giant's Lance Peak, where they could rest. Beyond that lay the path to the Eyrie itself, perched high above the valley. Lord Baelish awaits you in the castle below, for now, the guide said. Should you need to ascend to the Eyrie, that will be arranged later. As they rode, Margaery noticed the people in the Vale seemed calm, far removed from the turmoil that had gripped King's Landing. She saw shepherds tending flocks, farmers harvesting late-season crops. Children waved from hillside paths, yet she sensed tension lurking behind their curiosity. The arrival of an envoy from King's Landing was not an everyday occurrence, especially now that the realm was in upheaval. Many likely wondered if war was coming to the Vale's doorstep. At length, they reached the Gates of the Moon, a stout castle nestled in the lower slopes. Towers rose from stone walls, and a wide courtyard fronted a main hall. The approach was guarded by men in the Arryn sigil. Once inside, stable hands rushed to take the horses. Margaery and Loras dismounted, feeling the stiffness of hours in the saddle. A steward in neat attire approached, bowing politely. My lord, my lady, I am Sandor Linderly, Castellan of the Gates of the Moon. Welcome to the Vale. Lord Protector Peter Baelish awaits you in the Great Hall. Margaery straightened her cloak, glancing at Loras. He gave her a reassuring nod, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Together, they followed the steward through the courtyard, up a short flight of stone steps, and into the castle's great hall. Sconces glowed along the walls, illuminating tapestries of the moon and falcon. The air smelled of pine and hearth smoke, cleaner than the usual city stench of King's Landing. At the far end, beneath a carved wooden screen, Peter Baelish stood. He wore a modest but finely tailored doublet of dark velvet, pinned with a mockingbird brooch, the sigil he had claimed for himself. His hair was combed neatly, and his mouth curved in an amiable smile. Flanking him were a few Vale knights, none of whom Margaery recognized. She couldn't see Lisa Arryn or young Lord Robert anywhere. Possibly they were at the Eyrie, or Baelish simply hadn't brought them forward. Lady Margaery, Baelish said, stepping forward. with arms outstretched as if greeting an old friend. Ser Loras, what a delight and a surprise to see the Tyrell rose bloom here in the Vale. We heard rumors of new developments in King's Landing, but we did not expect such esteemed guests so soon. Margaery inclined her head. Lord Baelish, we come bearing the greetings of King Stannis Baratheon, first of his name. We are here to discuss matters of mutual interest between the Crown and the Vale. We hope our presence is welcome. Baelish's dark eyes gleamed. But of course, the Vale is always eager to maintain peaceful relations with the Iron Throne. Though I confess, the throne changes occupants so frequently these days, it's difficult to keep abreast of allegiances. Last we heard, King Joffrey claimed the seat, and you were to be his bride, my lady. He let that linger, a note of feigned sympathy in his tone. How swiftly the world turns. Margaery forced a small, polite smile. Indeed it does, but that is precisely why we must speak. With Joffrey unmasked as illegitimate, and King Stannis lawfully enthroned, the realm stands at a crossroads. I believe the Vale shares an interest in ensuring peace. Peace, Baelish echoed with a soft chuckle. A noble goal always, and yet so elusive. Please let us sit and talk. You must be weary from your journey. He gestured to a side table where chairs had been arranged, a flagon of wine and cups already waiting. Margaery and Loras followed, the Vale Knights standing guard at a respectful distance. Two of the Tyrell Knights remained close behind, watchful. Baelish poured wine with a gracious flourish, offering a cup to Margaery first, then to Loras. Margaery accepted the cup but did not drink immediately. How fares Lady Lisa and young Lord Robert? Ah, both are well, Baelish replied smoothly. They reside at the Eyrie for the moment. The mountain air agrees with Lord Robert's health, you see. Perhaps, if time permits, we can ascend for a visit. But for now, let us speak of the business at hand. He took a sip of wine, regarding her over the rim of the cup. You've come to ensure the Vale remains loyal to this new monarchy, I gather? We have come to invite the Vale to reaffirm its bond with the Iron Throne, Margaery said carefully. Under the rule of King Stannis Baratheon, we seek no conflict here. We only wish to see that the Lords of the Vale do not align themselves with any rebellious cause in the Westerlands. As you likely know, certain Lannister partisans mutter about retribution. Baelish spread his hands in a placating gesture. The Vale is ever watchful of its own interests. We have no quarrel with House Tyrell, nor do we desire one with King Stannis. But you must understand, the Vale's traditions lean toward caution. We cannot simply march forth in alliance with every new claimant to the throne. We prefer to remain neutral unless threatened directly. Loras set his cup down with more force than necessary. There is no new claimant, my lord. Stannis is Robert Baratheon's true heir. By all the laws of succession, he is the rightful king. Neutrality in the face of that truth, especially if you are conspiring with Lannister rebels, would be seen as treason. I trust you do not deny this. For a moment, Baelish's amiable mask flickered. Then he laughed softly. Conspiring with Lannister rebels? My dear Ser Loras, you wound me. The Vale is not some nest of treason. Still, we do entertain emissaries from many corners. If someone from the west wishes to speak, we do not bar the gates. But talk is cheap. Action is another matter. Margaery took in Baelish's casual stance, the subtle glint in his eyes. He was hinting that yes, he had spoken with some from the Westerlands, but had not yet committed to them. He was keeping his options open. We understand, Lord Baelish, she said with a gracious nod, and we do not demand that the Vale march out tomorrow. We only ask that it not embrace the cause of the West or attempt to undermine King Stannis. If you can pledge that, we can leave with confidence that the Vale poses no threat. King Stannis would, of course, reward that loyalty with favorable trade and recognition of your autonomy. Baelish tapped a finger on the table. Favorable trade is an intriguing prospect, especially considering the Vale's grain and silver mines. And the Tyrells have great wealth, do they not? I recall you were once quite generous at the capital, Lady Margaery. She caught the hint in his voice. He wanted gold, or perhaps some advantage to line his own pockets. Or maybe he was fishing for a marriage alliance, though she doubted it. "Yes," she said smoothly. "House Tyrell has the means to foster strong economic ties. If the Vale stands with us, or at least does not rise against us, we can ensure beneficial agreements." Baelish raised his brows, feigning modesty. "Truly, it is my only wish to see the Vale prosper in peace. But forging new agreements might be best done in the presence of the Vale's other lords. I wouldn't want them to think I act unilaterally on such matters. They can be a fractious lot, especially Lord Royce and the others who once supported young Robb Stark. Perhaps you would join me at a small council of these lords, so we might discuss the future." Margaery nodded. "We would be happy to. When might such a gathering be convened?" He smiled. "Perhaps in 3 days' time, here at the Gates of the Moon. I can send ravens to those lords who are nearby, urging them to attend. Lady Lisa remains in the Eyrie, but I can request her presence if needed." 3 days, Margaery agreed. It was a short enough wait. "We will stay here, then. We look forward to meeting the Vale's lords." Baelish clapped his hands softly. "Splendid. You shall have chambers prepared for you. Allow me to show you to them, and we can make sure you have every comfort." With that, the conversation ended on a cordial note. As they rose, Margaery and Loras exchanged brief glances. Neither entirely trusted Baelish, but at least they had secured an audience with the other Vale lords. If, at that gathering, they could prove Stannis' legitimacy and demonstrate the benefits of an alliance, the Vale might be swayed to remain peaceful. Baelish, of course, would do his utmost to extract personal gain. But as long as he did not openly defy Stannis, that might be enough to avert a greater conflict. They followed Baelish's steward through winding corridors to a set of airy chambers overlooking a courtyard. The windows offered a stunning view of the mountain slopes. Margaery found the furniture simple but well-crafted, the linens fresh. After so many days on the road, it felt luxurious to have a private room and a decent bed. A pair of Tyrell knights stood guard outside. Once they were alone, Loras exhaled. "He's as slippery as ever." Margaery sank onto a wooden bench by the window, gazing at the peaks beyond. "Yes, but we have 3 days to prepare. We must gather every argument, every promise, every advantage we can to ensure the Vale's neutrality or loyalty. If we fail, we risk a war on 2 fronts. If we succeed, we can save thousands of lives." Loras nodded, looking weary but resolved. "Then let us proceed with caution." The next 3 days passed swiftly as Margaery and Loras navigated the slow intricacies of Vale politics. Baelish sent out ravens to the principal lords, and riders departed with invitations. Margaery busied herself drafting letters to reaffirm Stannis' willingness to respect the Vale's autonomy and to clarify the official stance of House Tyrell in supporting the new king. She also penned a private letter to Olenna in King's Landing, reporting on her progress thus far. Every day she felt that underlying tension, knowing that if Baelish had truly plotted with the West, he could spring a trap at any moment. But nothing amiss occurred. The Vale Knights were polite, if distant. In the evenings, Baelish hosted modest meals in the Great Hall, making small talk about the local harvests and the region's traditions, betraying no sign of disloyalty. On the 3rd day, the lords of the Vale began to arrive. Lord Yohn Royce, big and gruff, wearing sturdy bronze armor reminiscent of the First Men. Lady Anya Waynwood, dignified and older, accompanied by her sons. Ser Gilwood Hunter, the current head of House Hunter. A few lesser lords and landed knights, all curious to see the famed Margaery Tyrell in person. Each had heard the story of how she exposed Joffrey's parentage and had helped place Stannis on the throne. Some were impressed. Others eyed her with caution. The small council was convened in a long hall at the Gates of the Moon. Baelish presided with a genial air, while Margaery and Loras took seats at a place of honor. The Vale lords arranged themselves around a rectangular table. Servants poured ale and wine. A hush settled as Baelish addressed them, introducing Margaery as the envoy of King Stannis. Then he invited her to speak. Margaery rose, projecting calm confidence. "My lords and ladies of the Vale, I thank you for granting me audience. I come on behalf of the rightful king Stannis Baratheon, who has claimed the throne by law and by blood. The false King Joffrey, a product of incest, has been deposed, and the Lannisters' grip on King's Landing is broken. Now, King Stannis seeks only stability for the realm, so that our people may heal from the wounds of war. He offers friendship and mutual prosperity to the Vale, recognizing your proud history and your guardianship of these mountains. In return, he asks only that you do not lend your strength to any who would challenge his reign. Remain at peace, or, if you will it, join the realm in forging a new era of stability. She paused, letting her words sink in. Some of the lords exchanged glances. Jon Royce cleared his throat. We all heard of Joffrey's cruelty and suspected the rumors of his illegitimacy might be true. Yet we also know that King Stannis has turned to a foreign god. Some fear that means intolerance for the faith of the Seven. Margaery inclined her head. I understand those fears, but the faith remains strong in King's Landing. Stannis has allowed the Great September to reopen. The new High Septon has not been impeded. There is tension, to be sure, but no purge of the faith is underway. The Seven have as much place in the realm as ever. Lady Waynwood pursed her lips. But what of the possibility that the West might rise again under a Lannister banner? The Vale has no wish to be caught between warring sides. Margaery offered a small, conciliatory smile. The West is in disarray. Tywin Lannister is dead, and his heirs scattered. If any cousin attempts to rally them, they will face the full might of the king's forces, along with House Tyrell's armies. The war could be short and decisive, unless the Vale intervenes on the Lannisters' behalf and prolongs the conflict. I urge you not to throw your strength behind a lost cause that would only bring ruin to these mountains. A murmur ran through the hall. Baelish lounged at the head of the table, tapping his fingers as if mildly amused. He then turned to Jon Royce. Lord Royce, you once marched with Robb Stark, did you not? You saw how quickly fortunes can change when the tide of war shifts. Royce nodded heavily. I lost many good men in those battles. I've no taste for more war. If King Stannis can indeed keep the peace, I'd be inclined to remain neutral and see how events unfold. Lady Waynwood nodded in agreement. Neutrality might be best for now. We do not seek the destruction of the Vale, but we also do not wish to bend the knee to another new king unless we are sure he can hold the throne. Margaery took a careful breath. King Stannis does not demand immediate fealty if you prefer to remain apart. But he does request a pledge that you will not harbor or support any Lannister faction seeking to overthrow the crown. That alone could suffice to maintain peace. Another round of murmurs. Then Baelish gave a theatrical sigh. You see, my lords, Lady Margaery is quite persuasive. She offers us all a path to avoid bloodshed. I, for one, am inclined to concur that risking war with King Stannis would be unwise. He glanced at Margaery, smile thinning. Unless, of course, the Vale is denied some small measure of reassurance? Margaery understood the game. He was angling for concessions. What reassurance do you seek? He shrugged, leaning back. Oh, perhaps a promise of exclusive trade rights in certain goods, or a formal royal decree that the Vale's taxes remain moderate. Little trifles to ensure the well-being of Lord Robert Arryn, that precious boy who depends upon us all. I wouldn't want him to suffer financially, given his delicate constitution. Margaery suppressed an urge to frown. Such matters can be arranged in a formal treaty. I have the authority to promise favorable trade terms and lowered tax burdens for a set period, so long as you remain at peace and do not align with any rebellion. Baelish beamed. Then we are in agreement. My lords, can we concur that the Vale remains neutral, pledging not to join the Lannister cause? In exchange, we gain beneficial trade terms from King Stannis' regime. That seems more than fair. Lord Royce grunted. Lady Waynwood nodded, as did the others. Soon enough, they all voiced cautious approval. Margaery felt a surge of relief. By not pressing them to swear immediate fealty, she had preserved their pride. By offering trade incentives, she appealed to their self-interest. It appeared a workable compromise had been found. The Vale would not ride against King's Landing, and the threat of a two-front war would recede. As the lords discussed the wording of a formal statement, Baelish turned to Margaery, dropping his voice so only she could hear. "I commend you on your diplomatic skill. One wonders if you might do as well in forging peace with others who still doubt Stannis's claim." She offered a polite smile. "I do what must be done to spare the realm more bloodshed." He inclined his head. A noble sentiment indeed. His eyes flicked to Loras, who sat near them. "If only all men in King's Landing shared your vision. I recall a time when cunning was matched with cruelty. But you, my lady, are cunning matched with mercy. A rare combination." Margaery gave a faint nod, uncertain how to respond to such flattery. Baelish's compliments often concealed deeper designs. Still, it seemed that, for now, his goals aligned with hers. With the Vale neutral, the realm's road to peace was clearer. She reminded herself that if Baelish sensed a more profitable path with the Lannisters, he could yet change course, but at least this official arrangement would bind the Vale's principal lords. The council concluded with the drafting of a short agreement. The Vale would not declare for any Lannister pretender. King Stannis would grant them favorable trade terms and allow them autonomy in local governance. Baelish insisted on phrasing that left the door open for a future oath of fealty if they saw fit. The Vale lords affixed their seals, as did Margaery and Loras on behalf of Stannis. Copies were made, to be sent by Raven to King's Landing for ratification. When it was done, Margaery felt a rush of relief. She rose and curtsied to the assembled lords. "I thank you for your wisdom in choosing peace," she said. "May our realms grow stronger together." Royce nodded gruffly. "We shall see. If your king keeps his word, we keep ours. And if any Lannister scoundrels attempt to pass through our mountains, they'll find the Vale as unyielding as stone." Baelish swept forward. "A toast, then?" Servants moved to refill cups. Margaery took a measured sip of the new wine they poured, mindful not to drink too deeply in Baelish's presence. The lords drank, albeit with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Thus concluded the formal side of the meeting. Over the next hour, they mingled in small clusters, discussing details and exchanging pleasantries. Margaery could sense the undercurrents of suspicion and relief. Some still questioned how stable Stannis's reign would be, but no one in the Vale wished to fling themselves into a losing war. Baelish, meanwhile, prowled among them like a cat, smoothing tensions and dropping cunning hints about how this arrangement might enrich them. Loras stood guard by Margaery's side, intercepting any overly forward knights. As evening crept in, the lords began to depart for their lodgings, or to ride back to their own seats in the Vale's valleys. Margaery found herself stepping out onto a balcony overlooking the courtyard. The sun was setting behind the towering peaks, painting the sky in bands of gold and purple. The crisp mountain air felt refreshing on her cheeks. She heard footsteps and turned to see Baelish approaching, a thoughtful expression on his face. He stood at her side, resting his hands lightly on the stone rail. For a moment he simply watched the sunset. Then he murmured, "You managed that gathering quite deftly, my lady. I'm impressed." She inclined her head. "You played your part as well, Lord Baelish." He smiled, eyes glinting. "I know some in King's Landing see me as an opportunist, but I assure you, I merely wish to secure the best outcome for myself and those I serve." She studied him, which begs the question. Do you truly intend to keep the Vale out of conflict, or are you simply waiting for a better offer from the West? He gave a soft laugh, sharp as ever. "For now, I see no profit in backing a Lannister cause that's all but doomed. Tywin was the real power. Without him, they're fractured. And King Stannis is not a man to be trifled with lightly, nor are the Tyrells. No, I think I will remain in the Vale, quietly building security for Lord Robert and Lady Lisa." He paused, letting the wind ruffle his hair. "Of course, if Stannis proves incompetent, or if the realm plunges into chaos again, I reserve the right to reconsider my position." Margaery gave a half-smile. "Naturally, but hopefully by then, King's Landing will have stabilized, and there will be no need for further bloodshed." Baelish's gaze flicked toward her. "You truly desire peace, do you not?" Unlike so many who wear crowns or scheme to seize them, you appear genuine. Yet you have a backbone of steel beneath that gracious exterior. It's a rare thing. She turned her face away from his scrutiny, watching the sky deepen into twilight. I've seen too much suffering already. If I can prevent more, I will. He inclined his head. A worthy goal. Take care, though. The realm is full of hidden serpents. Even you might find your good intentions used by someone more ruthless. She looked at him sidelong. A warning or a confession? He chuckled. A friendly caution, my lady. My confession, if you will, is that I do find you quite remarkable. If we ever find ourselves at cross purposes, I suspect you'll prove a formidable opponent. She offered a polite nod, stepping back. Let us hope we remain on the same side. With that, she withdrew, leaving Peter Baelish gazing at the mountains, an enigmatic smile on his lips. She returned to her chambers, where Loras awaited her, arms folded. He raised a brow as if to say, "Be careful with that one." She only nodded. The day's triumph was secure enough. The veil was neutralized, if not wholeheartedly allied. That was more than enough for her mission. That night, she slept more soundly, satisfied that she had done her duty. In the morning, after final courtesies with Baelish and his steward, Margaery and Loras prepared to depart the Vale. They would return to King's Landing with a written pledge from the Vale Lords, hopefully ensuring that the realm would not face an eastern threat. Baelish waved them off at the castle gates, flanked by a few silent knights. His mockingbird pin gleamed in the early sunlight. As they wound back down the pass, picking up the remainder of their retinue, Margaery reflected on how one more step toward lasting peace had been taken. Certainly, the realm was not yet fully calm. The Westerlands might still muster. The North was in turmoil. The Iron Islands were always a wild card, and the new king faced internal tension with the Red Faith. Yet for now, the Tyrell alliance had secured the capital, ended Joffrey's tyranny, and forestalled the Vale's intervention. They retraced their route, passing the fortress outposts, heading toward Maidenpool again. On the way, Margaery half expected to encounter some new disaster, but the roads remained tranquil. Once at Maidenpool, they learned that the city had seen no major trouble since their departure. The mood was even slightly improved, with trade ships arriving from the Narrow Sea. People whispered that the realm might be on the verge of stability for the first time in years. At last, they rode south, approaching King's Landing more than 3 weeks after they had left. The city walls rose in the distance, the same scars and repairs visible on the battlements. Margaery's heart beat faster, wondering what had transpired in her absence. The gates admitted them readily once the Tyrell banners were recognized. Inside, the streets bustled with midday commerce, more alive than she'd seen them in quite some time. Merchants hawked goods, fisherfolk called out their catches. Though she still noted pockets of poverty, the city seemed to have regained a semblance of normal rhythm. As they advanced toward the Red Keep, a squad of Baratheon guards approached, saluting. One stepped forward, bowing. "Lady Margaery, Ser Loras, welcome back. The king requests your presence in the throne room as soon as you are rested. There have been developments." A prickle of anxiety crawled over Margaery's skin. What sort of developments? The guard hesitated. The trial for Joffrey has begun. Word is that he demanded trial by combat. I know little else, only that the city's been buzzing with rumors. Some say it's a formality, others say. He broke off, seeing Loras's darkening expression. "Very well," Margaery said quietly. "We'll attend to the king swiftly." They urged their horses on, up the hill to the Red Keep's gates, where their party dismounted. Servants rushed to stable their mounts. Margaery found Olenna waiting in the courtyard, face drawn. She grasped Margaery's hand the moment they drew near. "Child, I'm glad you're back. Things are turning ugly here." Margaery's pulse quickened. "What's happening? Has Joffrey truly demanded a trial by combat?" Olenna nodded grimly. Yes, and the king could hardly refuse, not after offering the same to Cersei, who, by the by, found no champion. Her execution is set to proceed within days. But Joffrey, The mad boy howled that no knight in King's Landing would dare face him, so they had to allow him time to find a champion from among the Lannister supporters. Lo and behold, a Westerland's knight arrived. A man calling himself Ser Bonifer Hasty, though rumor says he's as fierce as any. They say the combat is scheduled for 2 days hence. Loras's eyes blazed. And who fights for the crown side? Olenna's mouth pressed into a line. Stannis has named Lord Brienne of Tarth as the champion for the crown, interestingly enough. She's been in the city after fulfilling some vow to Catelyn Stark. She has a formidable reputation, though many lords scoff at the idea of a woman fighting in the king's name. But Stannis apparently respects her skill, and she despises Joffrey for Ned Stark's fate. Margaery felt the swirl of tension tighten in her gut. A trial by combat would be a spectacle. If Joffrey's champion somehow won, it could cause chaos, letting the boy claim he was innocent by the gods' judgment. The city might erupt. But if Brienne prevailed, Joffrey's fate would be sealed. When is it set to occur? 2 days from now at midday in the courtyard, Olenna replied. Stannis wants it visible to the public. He wants no illusions about Joffrey's monstrous guilt. Margaery closed her eyes briefly. Then we must prepare. If Joffrey's champion wins, the realm will be thrown into doubt. If Joffrey himself fights, Joffrey fight? Pa! The boy can barely stand, Olenna said with disdain. He's shrieking in the dungeons that he is the rightful king, that the gods will smite all traitors. They'll lead him out in chains, I expect, to watch. But he demanded the right to pick a champion, and this Bonifer Hasty arrived out of nowhere. Loras clenched his fists. Then let us hope Brienne's skill holds true. We can't let Joffrey slip away from justice. Margaery nodded, though her heart pounded with dread. Where is King Stannis now? In the throne room, hearing petitions. You should see him soon and deliver the news of your success in the Vale. That might hearten him if he worries about the Westerlands meddling. They parted with Olenna, ascending the Red Keep's broad steps. Margaery felt the weight of the city's expectations pressing on her. She had left on a mission to secure peace, only to return and find a final confrontation with Joffrey looming. 2 days. In 2 days, the Boy King's fate would be decided by steel. The city would crowd into the courtyard, thirsting for a verdict from the gods. She passed the guards at the doors, stepping into the familiar gloom of the Red Keep's entry hall. Loras followed at her side, wearing his travel-stained cloak. They made their way toward the throne room, the hush broken by scattered courtiers waiting or whispering. A sense of anticipation hovered in the air. If Joffrey's champion won, everything could unravel. But if Brienne of Tarth triumphed, the realm would see Joffrey die once and for all. Margaery forced a steady breath. She had walked this path of truth to its bitter end. Now she could only watch how the final thread unraveled. When the throne room doors opened, Margaery stepped inside, mind racing with the news she must deliver to Stannis about the Vale. But behind it all, her thoughts spiraled toward the day after tomorrow, the day the entire realm would watch a trial by combat that could decide King's Landing's fate yet again. She only prayed the outcome would finally close this chapter of terror, so the realm might begin to heal in earnest.